Have you ever wondered why life feels so unbearably unfair at times? Why one moment of loss, one harsh word, or one broken promise can echo through your entire being for days, weeks, even years? It is not just the pain itself that lingers. It is something deeper, something more invisible, something that quietly grows inside your mind long after the original wound has passed. This is where suffering becomes a prison of our own making. And this is exactly where the Buddha, more than 25 centuries ago, shined the light of clarity. Imagine this. You are sitting alone in your room late at night. Your phone is silent. Your thoughts are not. You replay a conversation you had earlier, perhaps with someone you love, perhaps with someone you work with. They said something sharp, something careless, and it cut into you. At first, it was just words. That is the first arrow. But then you carried it with you. You replayed it in your mind, asking yourself why they said it, wondering what you did wrong, constructing stories about who you are and what you deserve. The pain multiplied. You did not just feel it once. You felt it dozens of times, each replay stabbing again. That is the second arrow. The Buddha explained that the ordinary person is struck twice. First by the unavoidable pain of life itself, and then again by the stories, judgments, and resistance of the mind. We cannot avoid the first arrow, but the second one, that is in our hands. It is our choice whether to fire it or not. And yet, most of us, without realizing, spend our entire lives shooting arrow after arrow into ourselves. Think about the last time your heart was broken. Maybe someone you trusted betrayed you. The first arrow was the ache of separation, the sting of betrayal. But then came the whispers of the mind. I am not lovable. I am broken. I will never be whole again. That is the second arrow, and often it cuts deeper than the first. Or consider a failure at work or school. The first arrow is the sting of disappointment, but then you tell yourself, I am worthless. I will never succeed. Everyone is better than me. Again, the second arrow becomes heavier than the original pain. We live in a world filled with second arrows. When someone ignores our message, we assume they don't care. When a stranger looks at us in a certain way, we assume they are judging. When we make a small mistake, we relive it endlessly. These are not the world's arrows. These are our own. And the tragedy is that we believe them. We believe the stories more than the reality. The Buddha offered a simple but radical truth. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. The body will ache. Our loved ones will sometimes leave us. Our plans will fail. The world will change in ways we cannot control. But the extra suffering, the second arrow, is not imposed on us. It is created by us. It is born in the stories we attach to the pain, in the endless resistance we put up against life as it is. Picture this clearly. Imagine the first arrow piercing your skin. It hurts. It is sharp. But then, with your own hand, you pick up another arrow and push it into the same wound again and again. You would never do this in real life, and yet, this is exactly what we do in our minds every single day. We bruise ourselves with memory, with imagination, with fear. The power of this teaching is not abstract. It is intensely practical. Because the moment you see the difference between the first arrow and the second, you begin to realize that your freedom does not depend on controlling the world. It depends on recognizing the arrows in your own hand. It depends on putting them down. This is where our journey begins. In the next hours, We will dive deeply into this teaching, not as philosophy, not as distant history, but as living truth. We will listen to the Buddha's words. We will connect them with the findings of modern psychology and neuroscience. And most importantly, we will practice together so you can feel in your own body what it means to stop shooting the second arrow. But first, let us sit with this truth. Life hurts. That cannot be denied. Pain comes with every birth, every sickness, every loss. That is the first arrow. But suffering is the second arrow, and we do not need to carry it. Imagine for a moment how different your life would feel if every pain was just one pain, not 2, not 10, not 100. Imagine if grief was simply grief, not a lifetime of torment. Imagine if failure was simply failure, not proof that you are unworthy. Imagine if rejection was simply rejection, not a declaration that you will be alone forever. This is what the Buddha was pointing to, not the end of arrows, but the end of unnecessary arrows. So take a breath. Feel the air entering your lungs, the weight of your body on the chair, the simple fact of being alive right now. This moment is the first arrow of life. But notice the stories that try to creep in. Notice the mind whispering, "This is not enough. You are not enough." That is the second arrow. And right here, in this very moment, you can set it down. Perhaps you have been carrying second arrows for years. Old betrayals that still sting. Words spoken long ago that you still hear. Regrets that pierce you every morning when you wake. These arrows are heavy. They have bent your back and hardened your heart. But the truth is, you do not need to carry them anymore. They are not the world's arrows. They are your own, and you can let them go. The Buddha's teaching is not meant to be distant or abstract. It is not meant to be locked in dusty books or hidden in temples. It is meant for this very moment, for your life, for your suffering, for your freedom. Because when you stop firing second arrows, something incredible happens. The pain remains, yes, but it becomes lighter, cleaner, more bearable. A wound is just a wound, a tear is just a tear, a loss is just a loss, and beyond them all is the spaciousness of a mind that is no longer at war with itself. This is the invitation before you now. For the next few hours, let this be your refuge. Let the noise of the world fade. Let the storms inside you grow quiet. Together, we will walk through pain, through the arrows of life, and discover the astonishing truth that freedom is not found in escaping pain, but in meeting it without the extra arrow of suffering. So breathe, be here, and know this: the arrows may come, but you no longer need to pick them up. Life is full of moments that pierce us like arrows. A harsh word, a sudden loss, an unexpected failure. Each of these moments has the power to cut through our defenses and leave us reeling. But what most of us never realize is that the sharpest wounds we carry are not from the world outside, but from the world within. This was the insight of the Buddha, an insight that has endured for more than 2,000 years. He explained that suffering is not simply what happens to us, but what our mind does in response. Think for a moment about the last time something painful happened in your life. Maybe it was the end of a relationship. Maybe it was losing an opportunity you cared about. Maybe it was a loved one's illness. Whatever it was, you remember the sting, the ache in your chest, the heaviness in your body. That was the first arrow. It was real, sharp, undeniable. But if you are honest, you will also see that your mind did not stop there. You replayed the story again and again. You asked yourself questions that had no answers. You blamed yourself, you blamed others, you imagined different outcomes, and you made the pain grow larger with every thought. That was the second arrow. The Buddha described this simple but profound truth in a teaching that has come to be known as the discourse of the two arrows. He said that the ordinary person is struck twice. First, by the unavoidable pain of life itself, and then again by the reaction of the mind. We cannot escape the first arrow. It is part of being human. But the second arrow, that is optional. It is the suffering we create ourselves, the storm we conjure out of fear, regret, and resistance. Imagine a man walking down a path in the forest. Suddenly, from the trees, an arrow flies and strikes him in the shoulder. The pain is immediate and intense. That is the first arrow. But then imagine that same man picking up a bow and shooting himself again and again, each time driving the wound deeper, each time multiplying the pain. You would call him foolish. You would say, "Why are you hurting yourself more when the first wound was already enough?" And yet, this is exactly what we do in our daily lives. We take the first arrow of pain, and then we add dozens more by the way we think about it. Consider a simple example. You are walking through your house at night and stub your toe against the corner of the table. The sharp jolt makes you wince. That is the first arrow. But what happens next? You curse, you get angry, you replay it in your mind. You tell yourself, "I am so clumsy. Why does this always happen to me?" Suddenly, the pain is not just in your toe. It is in your heart, your mind, your whole mood for the evening. The bruise on your toe might fade in a day, but the second arrow of irritation can poison your entire night. Or imagine losing your job. The first arrow is the shock, the fear, the uncertainty about the future. That is painful enough. But then your mind adds the second arrow. I am worthless. I will never find work again. I have failed my family. Now the wound is not just about the job. It is about your identity, your sense of worth, your future. The second arrow turns one loss into an avalanche of despair. The same is true in our relationships. When someone you love says something unkind, the first arrow is the sting of those words. But then the second arrow comes when you begin to replay the argument, when you convince yourself they never cared, when you start to believe you are unlovable. The fight may have lasted 5 minutes, but the second arrow can torment you for years if you hold on to it. The Buddha wanted us to see that we are not helpless victims of suffering. Yes, pain is part of life. Yes, arrows will strike. But the suffering that lasts, the suffering that breaks us, is often the one we create ourselves. This insight changes everything. Because if suffering is created by the mind, then freedom is also possible in the mind. If we can learn to see the second arrow clearly, we can learn to put it down. This does not mean ignoring pain. The first arrow is real. It hurts. The practice is not about pretending it doesn't. The practice is about meeting the pain directly, without adding the layers of judgment and resistance. It is about feeling the wound as it is, not as the endless story we weave around it. When we do this, something remarkable happens. The pain remains, but it becomes lighter, cleaner, more bearable. It is no longer magnified by the weight of our own thoughts. Think about grief. When someone we love dies, the first arrow is immense. The ache in the heart, the emptiness in the home, the tears that seem endless, this pain cannot be denied. But then the second arrow comes in the form of questions. Why did this have to happen? I should have done more. I will never recover. These thoughts cut deeper than the loss itself. They turn grief into torment. But when we see the second arrow for what it is, we can honor the natural grief without adding more suffering. We can allow the heart to mourn without stabbing it again and again with blame and resistance. This teaching is not meant to be abstract philosophy. It is a practical guide for how to live with more peace. Every day we are struck by small arrows, delays in traffic, criticism at work, arguments at home. We cannot stop the arrows from coming, but we can stop multiplying them. We can pause, we can breathe, and we can choose not to add the second arrow. Let me ask you a simple question. How many second arrows did you shoot at yourself today? Did you assume someone was judging you when they barely noticed you? Did you replay a mistake long after everyone else had forgotten it? Did you tell yourself you were not enough when in truth you were simply tired or distracted? Each of these moments is a second arrow, and each one is optional. The Buddha's wisdom invites us to notice this habit and gently let it go. The next time pain arises, ask yourself, is this the first arrow or the second? If it is the first, breathe and feel it. If it is the second, release it. You do not need to stab yourself again. You can choose peace. In this way, life begins to change. Pain still comes, yes, but suffering no longer dominates. The arrows of life become manageable because you no longer add more of your own. And in the space that opens up, there is room for healing, for compassion, for freedom. This is where our journey begins, with the simple but profound truth that while we cannot escape the first arrow, we do not need to fire the second. More than 2,000 years ago, the Buddha spoke words that are still fresh today, words that cut straight to the heart of human experience. He said, "When an ordinary person feels pain, they cry, they grieve, they lament. They feel two kinds of pain, one in the body and another in the mind. It is as if they were struck by an arrow, and then, right after, they were struck by a second one as well. So they suffer the pain of two arrows. But when a wise disciple feels pain, though the ache of the body is there, they do not add a second wound in the mind. They feel only one arrow." Pause and let those words sink in. Two arrows. The first is unavoidable, the sting of life itself, the raw shock of loss, the ache of illness, the sharpness of failure. But the second arrow is optional. It is born not in the body, but in the mind. It is the extra story, the endless replay, the judgment that turns pain into torment. And this is where freedom lies, not in avoiding the first arrow, but in refusing to add the second. Think of it this way. The first arrow is the world. The second arrow is the mind. The first arrow pierces for a moment. The second arrow can pierce for years. And yet, strangely, we accept the second arrow as if we had no choice. We tell ourselves, "This is who I am now. This is my story. This is my wound." But the Buddha's teaching breaks that illusion wide open. He reminds us, the second arrow is in your hand. You can put it down. Imagine again the man walking through the forest who is struck by an arrow. The pain is sharp, but he can breathe. He can bandage the wound. He can keep walking. But if he chooses to pick up another arrow and stab himself again, the wound becomes unbearable. That is what we do every day with our own minds. We are struck once by life, and then we stab ourselves 10 times more with memory, with anger, with regret. The Buddha is asking us, with great compassion, "Why are you hurting yourself when you do not need to?" Let us take a real example. Suppose you are criticized at work. Your boss says, "This project isn't good enough." The first arrow lands, your chest tightens, your stomach sinks, you feel embarrassed. That is natural, but what happens next is the second arrow. You go home replaying the scene again and again. You tell yourself, "I am a failure. I will never succeed. No one respects me." The original criticism lasted 1 minute, but the second arrow can last for months, even years, if you carry it. This is the trap of the mind. Or think of the pain of rejection. Someone you love turns away, and the first arrow pierces your heart. But then your mind adds the second arrow. "I am unlovable. I will be alone forever. There must be something wrong with me." The pain of rejection is real. But the suffering of believing those stories is the second arrow, and it is far heavier than the first. The Buddha's wisdom shows us that the difference between an ordinary person and a wise one is not the presence of pain. Both feel the first arrow. Both know grief. Both know loss. Both know sickness. The difference is that the wise person does not add the second arrow. They do not collapse into endless rumination. They simply meet the pain as it is and allow it to pass. This is the essence of mindfulness. To feel the pain without multiplying it, to allow the wound to be only what it is and not turn it into a prison of identity. When you are mindful, the arrow pierces once, not 100 times. Consider another example. You are walking in a field at dusk. You see a coiled shape on the path, and your heart races. You think, "A snake." Fear shoots through you. Your muscles tighten. But when you bring a lamp closer, you see that it is only a rope. The first arrow was the startle, the natural fear of danger. The second arrow would have been the long hours of imagining how close you came to death, the endless fear of walking that path again, the story you would carry about snakes forever. But the light revealed the truth, and the second arrow never landed. Mindfulness is that lamp. It shows you the difference between rope and snake, between pain and story. The beauty of the Buddha's words lies in their simplicity. He did not use complicated philosophy. He used an image anyone could understand. Arrows hurt. One is enough. Why add another? That image lives in the mind like a seed, growing clearer each time you notice yourself firing the second arrow. In our time, surrounded by constant noise, the second arrow has only become more dangerous. We are struck by the first arrow of life, stress, criticism, loss, and then the digital world magnifies the second arrow endlessly. Social media makes us compare. News makes us fearful. Our own thoughts replay again and again. The Buddha's words remind us that even in the chaos of modern life, the same truth holds. You cannot stop the first arrow, but you can stop the second. So how do we do this? The first step is simply to notice. The next time pain arises, pause and ask, is this the first arrow or the second? Feel the body, the tight chest, the heavy heart, that is the first arrow. But then listen to the mind. If it is saying, "I am broken, I will never recover, this is who I am," then you are already firing the second arrow, and you can stop. You can breathe. You can let the thought go. You can choose not to believe it. Every time you do this, the second arrow falls from your hand. Every time you notice, you weaken the habit of self-wounding, and slowly life becomes lighter. Pain is still there, but suffering no longer rules you. The Buddha's words were meant for people like us, ordinary people with ordinary lives, filled with ordinary pains. He did not promise a life without arrows. He promised a way to live without unnecessary arrows. And that promise is as alive now as it was when he first spoke it. So remember this image. The first arrow is life. The second arrow is the mind. One is inevitable. The other is optional. When pain arises, feel it honestly, let it be what it is, and refuse to add more. In that refusal, there is freedom. In that refusal, there is peace. The teaching of the two arrows becomes truly alive when we see it in the details of our own lives. It is one thing to hear that suffering comes in two layers, but it is another to recognize the pattern in the raw experiences of loss, sickness, and failure. Each of these situations brings the first arrow sharply into our bodies, and each invites the second arrow unless we meet it with wisdom. Let us begin with loss, one of the most universal pains of being human. Imagine standing at the bedside of someone you love as they take their last breath. The first arrow pierces you instantly. The ache is overwhelming, the emptiness impossible to describe. Your chest feels crushed, your eyes flood with tears. This is grief. It is natural. It is the cost of love. No human being escapes this arrow, but then, often without even noticing, the mind begins to fire the second arrow. You think, I should have done more. I should have called more often. I should have been there every moment. You imagine different endings, different choices, different versions of the story that can never exist. And with each thought, the wound deepens. The loss itself was heavy, but the guilt and self-blame make it unbearable. Yet it does not have to be this way. The first arrow of grief cannot be avoided, but the second arrow of endless regret is not inevitable. When you see the pattern clearly, you can say, "This hurts, yes, but I will not stab myself again with blame. I will honor this grief. I will let my heart ache, but I will not imprison myself in stories that cannot change the past." In that clarity, the grief softens into love, into memory, into something that can heal. Now let us turn to illness. The body is fragile. No matter how strong we feel today, sickness comes eventually, and with it, the first arrow. A fever burns, a pain throbs, a diagnosis arrives with heavy words. The first arrow is sharp and real. The body carries the wound. But notice what happens next. The mind fires the second arrow. Why me? My life is ruined. I will never be well again. I am broken. Suddenly, the body carries one arrow, but the mind adds 10 more. The illness itself is already difficult, but the fear, the despair, the hopelessness multiply the suffering beyond measure. Think of someone who lives with chronic pain. Every day, the first arrow is there, the ache in the back, the stiffness in the joints. But if the mind adds the second arrow of resentment, "This is unfair, I cannot live like this, I am cursed," then the pain becomes a prison. Yet another person with the same condition might meet the pain with presence. They might say, "This hurts, I will breathe with it, I will care for my body as best I can." The ache remains, but without the second arrow, it does not consume them. They find moments of peace, even within the pain. Now consider failure, a pain that strikes especially hard in our modern world. You pour yourself into a project, you work with all your energy, and then it collapses. The first arrow is disappointment. It stings, It makes your stomach twist, your heart sink. That pain is natural. But the second arrow is the voice of self-doubt. I am worthless. I am not talented. I will never succeed. That voice is not the truth. It is the second arrow, and it cuts deeper than the failure itself. Think of a student who fails an exam. The first arrow is the shock of seeing the grade, the tightness in the chest, the fear of what comes next. But then comes the second arrow. I am stupid. I will never amount to anything. Everyone else is better than me. The exam lasted one day, but the second arrow can shape their identity for years if they believe it. Another student, struck by the same first arrow, might say, "This hurts, but it is just one test. I can learn. I can grow." The difference is not in the pain, but in whether they fire the second arrow. The Buddha's teaching reminds us that the second arrow is always a choice, even when it doesn't feel like one. The first arrow of loss, illness, and failure will always come, but the second arrow is optional. And when we learn to see it, we can choose to put it down. Let us pause and imagine 3 different lives. In the first, a woman loses her husband. The grief is unbearable. She carries the first arrow, and then she adds the second. She tells herself, "I cannot live without him. My life is over. I will never recover." Her days become dark, her nights endless. The grief is real, but the suffering grows because of the second arrow. In the second life, a man is diagnosed with a serious illness. The pain in his body is intense, but the second arrow is even sharper. He says, "This is the end. I am useless now. My life is ruined." His spirit collapses before the illness itself takes its toll. In the third life, a young artist faces rejection. The gallery says no. The critics dismiss her work. The first arrow pierces her pride. But then the second arrow comes with fury. "I am a failure. I will never create again. I am wasting my life." The rejection lasted one day, but the suffering lasts for years. Now imagine each of them seeing the second arrow for what it is. The grieving woman breathes with her loss and says, "This hurts, but I will not blame myself endlessly. I will honor his memory with love, not torment." The sick man says, "This body is fragile, but I can still live with compassion. I will not collapse into despair." The young artist says, "This rejection stings, but it does not define me. I can try again." In each case, the first arrow remains, but the second arrow is laid down, and with it, a space for healing opens. This is not denial. It is not pretending pain does not exist. It is meeting pain as it is, without multiplying it. It is choosing not to stab yourself again when life has already struck once. And this choice, simple as it sounds, is the beginning of freedom. The truth is that life will always bring us arrows. We will lose, we will hurt, we will fail. No teaching, no practice can remove that. But what we can change is how we meet those arrows. We can let the first arrow pierce us once, or we can keep stabbing ourselves with the second. The difference between suffering and freedom lies right there. So the next time you feel the sting of loss, illness, or failure, pause. Notice the first arrow, feel it, name it, and then notice the second arrow as it rises. Ask yourself, do I need to fire this one? Do I need to make this wound deeper? The answer, every time, is no. And with that no, you step into the wisdom the Buddha offered so long ago. The wisdom of the Buddha may have been spoken 25 centuries ago, but today Modern science is catching up. The image of two arrows is not just a spiritual teaching, it is a psychological reality and a neurological fact. When we look closely at how the brain works, how emotions form, and how stress spreads through the body, we see the same truth the Buddha pointed to with such clarity. Pain is unavoidable, but suffering is optional. Neuroscience tells us that the brain is not a camera that simply records what happens. It is a prediction machine. Every moment, it takes in a little bit of raw sensory data, sights, sounds, feelings, and then fills in the rest with guesses, memories, and expectations. This is how you can walk through a familiar street without noticing every detail. Your brain already thinks it knows what is there. This is also how illusions trick us. The eye sees a shape, the brain guesses, snake, and fear rushes in, even if it is only a rope. The first arrow is the sensory data. The second arrow is the prediction, the story, the panic that the brain itself creates. Psychologists have a word for this habit: rumination. Rumination is when the mind chews on the same painful thought again and again, like a cow chewing grass long after the flavor is gone. Something painful happens the first arrow, and then the mind keeps replaying it, analyzing it, twisting it, until the suffering is far greater than the original event. Research shows that people who ruminate after a stressful event are more likely to become anxious, more likely to become depressed, more likely to feel hopeless. The first arrow is the event itself. The second arrow is rumination. Think about this in your own life. A friend says something sharp, a few careless words. That is the first arrow. It stings for a moment, but then your mind keeps going back to it over and over. Why did they say that? Do they secretly dislike me? Have I done something wrong? Soon you feel worse than you did in the original moment. That is the second arrow, sharpened by rumination. And modern psychology confirms what the Buddha said long ago. The second arrow is optional, and the best way to avoid it is to notice it, name it, and let it go. Science has also studied the effect of mindfulness, and the results are remarkable. When people practice even a few minutes of mindful breathing or body awareness each day, the activity in the parts of the brain responsible for stress and fear decreases. The amygdala, the brain's alarm system, grows calmer. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that helps us see clearly and make wise choices, becomes more active. In simple words, mindfulness literally rewires the brain to stop firing the second arrow. Pain may still arrive the first arrow, but the brain no longer multiplies it into endless suffering. There is another important discovery. Researchers have found that pain itself is not just physical. When you stub your toe, or when you feel rejected by a loved one, the brain uses some of the same circuits. Social pain and physical pain overlap. This means that the first arrow of rejection or loneliness can hurt as much as the first arrow of injury. But the second arrow of rumination, telling yourself you are worthless, unloved, broken, lights up those same pain circuits again and again. This is why the second arrow can feel even worse than the first. It is not just in your head, it is literally in your brain. Modern therapy often echoes the Buddha's insight. Cognitive behavioral therapy teaches people to recognize the thoughts that amplify pain and to challenge them. Instead of believing, "I failed once, so I will fail forever," you learn to say, "I failed once, and I can try again." This is the same as putting down the second arrow. Acceptance and commitment therapy teaches people to notice painful feelings, accept them without judgment, and still choose to act in ways that matter. This too is the Buddha's path, to allow the first arrow to exist without firing the second. Let's make this very practical. Suppose you lose your job. The first arrow is the shock, the fear, the uncertainty. That is real. Your body feels it, your heart races, your mind spins. But the second arrow is the thought, I am worthless, I will never recover, my life is ruined. Modern psychology would say that is rumination, that is distortion. The Buddha would say that is the second arrow. Both are pointing to the same thing. It is the story that causes the deeper suffering, and both offer the same solution. Pause, notice, let it go. Neuroscience also shows that attention is like a flashlight. Whatever you shine it on grows stronger in the brain. If you keep focusing on your wound, your regret, your anger, those circuits become stronger. The second arrow grows sharper each time you replay it. But if you shine your attention on the present moment, the breath, the body, the sounds around you, you weaken those circuits. You put the second arrow down. The Buddha's teaching is echoed in brain scans. Where attention goes, energy flows. We can even see this in small daily annoyances. You spill coffee on your shirt before a meeting. The first arrow is embarrassment, but the second arrow is the spiral of thoughts. Now everyone will laugh at me. I look like a fool. This day is ruined. The event lasted 10 seconds, but the second arrow can ruin hours. Modern psychology teaches the same practice as the Buddha. Notice the thought, see it for what it is, and let it pass. To bring this home, let's pause for a guided reflection. Sit comfortably for a moment, wherever you are. Close your eyes if you wish. Bring to mind a small pain from the past week. Maybe someone ignored your message. Maybe you missed an opportunity. Notice the first arrow, the sharpness, the ache, the sting. Now notice the second arrow, the story your mind created. They don't care about me. I am falling behind. I will never catch up. See the difference. The first arrow is an event. The second arrow is a story. Take a slow breath in, and as you breathe out, imagine letting the second arrow fall from your hand. Feel the relief of that release. What you just practiced is not philosophy. It is neuroscience. It is psychology, and it is Dharma. 3 paths, 1 truth. The brain predicts and distorts, the mind ruminates, but awareness breaks the cycle. You cannot stop the first arrow of life, but you can stop firing the second. This is what makes the Buddha's teaching timeless. It is not bound by language or culture. It is not only for monks in robes or scholars in libraries. It is for anyone with a human brain, a human heart, and a human life. Science and psychology have given us new ways of describing it, new images and new tools. But the truth is the same. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. The second arrow is in your hand, and you can put it down. Life today moves at a speed that would have been unimaginable in the Buddha's time. Emails arrive faster than we can answer them. Notifications tug at our attention every few minutes. Bills pile up, deadlines loom, and expectations never seem to end. In this storm of modern life, the teaching of the 2 arrows becomes even more vital. Because while the first arrow of stress is already sharp, the second arrow we fire at ourselves can turn daily challenges into unbearable suffering. Let's begin with stress itself. Imagine opening your inbox on a Monday morning and finding 50 unread emails. The first arrow lands immediately. Your chest tightens, your breath shortens, your shoulders rise. This is the body's natural reaction to pressure. It is unpleasant, but it is manageable. The second arrow, however, comes in the form of thoughts. I will never catch up. I am falling behind. Everyone else is more capable than me. The inbox was 1 arrow. The story you added was 10 arrows more. Suddenly, it is not just about emails. It is about your worth as a human being. The same pattern repeats in countless ways. A deadline approaches. The first arrow is nervous energy, the natural push of adrenaline. But the second arrow says, if I miss this, my career is over. I am a failure. I will never recover. 1 arrow of pressure turns into many arrows of despair. The Buddha's teaching cuts through this. The first arrow is real stress. The second arrow is the story. See the story clearly, and you can choose to set it down. Now let's look at social media, a place where the second arrow thrives. You scroll through your feed and see a friend's perfect vacation photos. The first arrow is the flicker of envy, the quick sting of comparison. That is natural. But then the second arrow strikes. Everyone else is happy but me. I am falling behind in life. I am not good enough. The screen becomes a mirror that distorts reality. What was once a simple image of a beach now becomes a weapon your mind uses against itself. The Buddha never knew Instagram, but he knew the human mind. He knew its habit of firing second arrows. Social media is just a new battlefield for an ancient struggle. Consider how many times you have felt fine until you compared yourself to someone online. One moment you are content, the next you are drowning in self-doubt. Nothing in your real life changed. Only the second arrow was fired. And the good news is that the second arrow can be dropped. You can look at the photo and say, that is their joy. I do not need to make it my pain. You can pause before the spiral of comparison begins. That pause is freedom. The pressure to succeed in our culture is another sharp arrow. From the time we are children, we are told to aim higher, achieve more, never stop striving. The first arrow is the natural desire to grow, to improve, to do well. There is nothing wrong with ambition itself. But the second arrow whispers, if I am not the best, I am nothing. If I fail once, I am worthless. I cannot rest until I prove myself. That second arrow turns healthy motivation into toxic perfectionism. Imagine a young professional chasing promotion after promotion. Each success brings a moment of joy, but the second arrow immediately follows. It is still not enough. I must do more. If I slow down, I will fall behind. The race never ends. No matter how much is achieved, the second arrow steals the joy and replaces it with anxiety. The Buddha's wisdom is a reminder that ambition without wisdom is suffering. The first arrow is the challenge of life. The second arrow is the identity we attach to it. If we can meet ambition with clarity, we can strive without stabbing ourselves. We can work hard, but also rest. We can grow, but also accept where we are. Technology has made the second arrow even sharper. Every ping of a phone, every buzz of a notification carries the first arrow of distraction. That is enough to pull the mind away from peace. But the second arrow is the belief, I must respond immediately. If I don't, something terrible will happen. I must always be available. Suddenly, we are chained to our devices, not because of the first arrow of distraction, but because of the second arrow of fear. Think about the last time you heard your phone buzz and felt an urge to grab it instantly, even when you were in the middle of something important. That is the second arrow in action. The sound was one arrow. The panic of missing out was the second. And once you see it, you realize you have a choice. You can let the phone buzz. You can respond later. The world will not collapse. This teaching is not about abandoning technology or rejecting modern life. It is about seeing clearly. The next time stress rises, ask yourself, is this the first arrow or the second? The next time you compare yourself online, pause and say, this is just a second arrow. I do not need it. The next time you feel crushed by ambition, breathe and remember, the first arrow is life. The second arrow is the story. I can put it down. Let us try a simple practice together. Think of one area of your modern life where stress is strongest. It might be work, it might be social media, it might be the endless pressure to succeed. Picture the first arrow, the real challenge itself. Feel it in your body, honestly, without denial. Now picture the second arrow, the story your mind adds. I cannot handle this. I am falling behind. I am not enough. Take a deep breath, and as you breathe out, imagine dropping the second arrow. Let it fall. Notice the relief. The problem is still there, but the extra suffering is gone. This is the practical power of the Buddha's teaching. It does not erase stress, but it prevents us from stabbing ourselves with stories that make stress unbearable. It does not erase comparison, but it stops us from turning envy into self-hatred. It does not erase ambition, but it keeps ambition from becoming obsession. Pain is real, stress is real, but suffering is a choice. In the chaos of modern life, the second arrow is everywhere, but once you learn to see it, you no longer need to fire it. And that single choice can transform the way you live. As we close this section, remember this. The Buddha's words were simple, but their relevance is endless. Every time you feel overwhelmed by stress, every time you lose yourself in comparison, every time you collapse under the pressure to succeed, pause. Ask yourself, is this the first arrow or the second? And then, with gentleness, choose to put the second arrow down. That is the beginning of freedom, even in the busiest, noisiest, most demanding world. Nowhere do the arrows of life strike deeper than in our relationships. With strangers, wounds are often small and short-lived. But with family, friends, and colleagues, the people we love and depend on, the smallest arrow can feel like it pierces straight to the heart. This is where the Buddha's teaching of the two arrows becomes not only wisdom, but survival. Because if we do not learn to see the second arrow in our relationships, we risk turning ordinary conflicts into lifelong scars. Let's begin with family. Imagine a sharp comment during a heated conversation with a parent, a sibling, or a spouse. The first arrow lands quickly. It stings. It makes your chest tighten and your face flush. That pain is real. But then the second arrow begins its work. Your mind says, they never respect me. They have always treated me this way. They don't love me. They will never change. The first arrow was one comment. The second arrow is an entire story of rejection, stretching across years. What could have been one wound now becomes a whole web of resentment. Think about how often family arguments replay in your mind long after the moment has passed. Hours later, days later, even years later, you still hear the words. The original comment was the first arrow. The endless replay is the second. And yet, if in that heated moment you had paused and seen the difference, everything could have changed. You could have said to yourself, "Yes, that hurt, but it is only one arrow." That pause might have softened your reaction, and it might have softened theirs. Now let's turn to friendship. A friend cancels plans at the last minute. The first arrow is disappointment. You feel left out. That ache is normal. But then the second arrow says, "They don't care about me. They were never a real friend. Maybe I don't matter to them." Soon the friendship itself feels poisoned, not by the first arrow of cancellation, but by the second arrow of suspicion. But pause and see clearly, and the story changes. Maybe they were simply tired. Maybe they were overwhelmed. Maybe it was one small mistake. The first arrow of disappointment can pass quickly. It is the second arrow that breaks the bond. At work, the arrows fly too. A colleague criticizes your idea in a meeting. The first arrow is discomfort, the sharpness of being challenged. But the second arrow fires immediately. "My boss must hate me. Everyone thinks I am incompetent. I am going to lose my job." Suddenly, one critique becomes a full-blown identity crisis. The workplace becomes unbearable, not because of one difficult comment, but because of the dozens of second arrows you fire at yourself each week. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that we cannot stop others from shooting arrows, but we can stop ourselves from adding more. A sharp word is one arrow. A forgotten call is one arrow. A harsh critique is one arrow. But the resentment, the suspicion, the identity we build around these moments, those are second arrows. And those are in our hands. There is another truth hidden here. When we carry second arrows inside ourselves, we often shoot them at others. Think about it. When you hold on to resentment, you snap back. When you carry fear, you withdraw. When you live with shame, you build walls. The second arrow you keep stabbing yourself with becomes the arrow you throw at the people you love. And so the cycle continues. Pain creates more pain. Arrows create more arrows. But when you put the second arrow down, everything changes. Suddenly you are not reacting from a wound. You are responding from clarity. Instead of shouting back, you can take a breath. Instead of shutting down, you can listen. Instead of clinging to suspicion, you can ask with curiosity, "What did you mean by that?" The space created by dropping the second arrow can transform a relationship. Let's make this practical. The next time someone close to you says something hurtful, pause before reacting. Notice the first arrow, the sting in your chest, the heat in your face. Acknowledge it. Then ask yourself, what second arrow am I about to fire? What story am I about to add? Maybe it is, "They always treat me this way." Maybe it is, "This proves they don't care." See the story for what it is, a second arrow, and choose not to fire it. Instead, respond with honesty. "That hurt me. Can we talk about it?" That single pause can be the difference between a wound that heals and a wound that lingers for years. Imagine a workplace where people practice this. A critical email arrives. Instead of spiraling into panic and firing second arrows, you pause and breathe. You say, "This email is unpleasant, yes, but it is only one arrow. I do not need to add more." You reply calmly, and the tension dissolves. Imagine friendships built on this clarity. A missed call does not turn into rejection. A cancelled plan does not become betrayal. The first arrow is felt, but the second arrow is set down. Relationships become lighter, easier, freer. And imagine family life with fewer second arrows. Arguments would still happen, painful words would still land, but they would not fester into lifelong resentment. Each arrow would be felt, acknowledged, and then released. Love would not be buried under layers of old wounds. Families would still argue, but they would also forgive. This is the hidden gift of the two arrows teaching. It is not only a practice for your own heart, it is a practice that can heal the space between hearts. When you stop stabbing yourself, you stop stabbing others. When you refuse the second arrow, you make it easier for others to refuse theirs. Slowly, a cycle of pain becomes a cycle of compassion. Try a small practice right now. Bring to mind one person in your life with whom you feel tension. Picture the first arrow, the thing they said or did that hurt you. Feel that pain honestly. Now picture the second arrow, the story you have repeated about them. They never listen. They always ignore me. They do not love me. See it clearly. Take a breath. And as you exhale, imagine laying that second arrow down. Imagine approaching them without it. Imagine speaking to them without the weight of that story. Notice how light you feel. Notice how possible healing suddenly seems. This is the path the Buddha pointed to. Not a life without conflict, but a life without unnecessary arrows. Not a life without pain, but a life where pain does not turn into lifelong suffering. It is not easy, but it is possible. And every pause, every breath, every refusal to fire the second arrow makes your relationships a little clearer, a little kinder, a little more free. So remember this. Family tension, friendship struggles, workplace stress, they all carry first arrows. Those arrows are real. But the wounds that last, the wounds that poison relationships, come from the second arrows we keep firing. Choose to put them down, lay them gently on the ground, and you will find not only peace in yourself, but healing in the space between you and the people you love. When we reach the end of the Buddha's teaching on the two arrows, a deeper truth quietly shines through. Yes, we learn to distinguish between the pain of the first arrow and the suffering of the second. Yes, we learn to pause before stabbing ourselves again and again with our own thoughts. But beneath all of this, there is something even more profound waiting to be discovered: compassion. Because the moment you put down the second arrow, you create space in your heart. And in that space, compassion grows naturally. At first, it is compassion for yourself. Think about how often you have spoken harshly to your own heart. You are not good enough. You should have done better. You will never get it right. These are the voices of the second arrow, and they wound us far more deeply than any criticism from the outside world. But when you see them clearly and gently set them aside, something changes. The voice softens. You begin to say, "Yes, I made a mistake, but I am still worthy. Yes, I feel pain, but I can still heal. Yes, I am imperfect, but I am human." That is the seed of self-compassion. From there, compassion begins to extend outward. You realize that the people around you are also struck by life's first arrows: loss, disappointment, illness, fear. They too know the ache of being alive. And like you, they often fire second arrows at themselves. Suddenly, forgiveness becomes possible, not because you excuse their mistakes, but because you understand the human struggle behind them. You see that just as you are learning not to wound yourself with endless second arrows, they too are caught in the same cycle. Compassion is born in that recognition. Think of someone you are holding resentment toward. Maybe they said something years ago that still hurts. Maybe they failed you when you needed them most. The first arrow was real. The pain of that moment was sharp and undeniable. But the suffering you still carry, the endless replay, the ongoing resentment, that is the second arrow. And every time you hold it, you bleed again. Forgiveness in this context does not mean forgetting. It does not mean pretending the wound never happened. It means refusing to stab yourself over and over with the same arrow. It means saying, I will honor the pain of that moment, but I will not carry it forever. I will let go, not for their sake alone, but for mine. Forgiveness frees the heart. It lifts the weight of years of second arrows, and in that space, love can return, healing can begin, relationships can soften, and even if reconciliation is not possible, your own heart is no longer imprisoned. Let's pause for a small guided reflection. Close your eyes if you wish. Bring to mind someone who has hurt you. Feel the first arrow, the real pain of what happened. Acknowledge it with honesty. Now notice the second arrow, the story you have carried. They ruined my life. They always do this. I will never forgive them. See that story for what it is. Another arrow, fired again and again. Take a slow breath, and as you exhale, imagine placing that arrow gently on the ground. Whisper to yourself, I do not need this anymore. Feel the relief of letting go, even if just a little. Now place your hand on your heart and say quietly, may I be free from unnecessary suffering. May I meet pain with wisdom. May I heal. Stay with that feeling for a moment. This is the essence of compassion, meeting pain without multiplying it, meeting wounds without turning them into lifelong prisons, meeting others with the understanding that they too are pierced by arrows, and they too long for freedom. As chapter 1 comes to a close, let us remember what the Buddha taught. Pain is inevitable, arrows will come, but suffering is optional. The second arrow is in our own hands, and we can choose to set it down. And in that simple act, we open the door to something greater. We open the door to compassion, forgiveness, and healing. So carry this with you. Every time you notice the sting of life, pause, ask, is this the first arrow or the second? Let the first arrow be what it is, but refuse the second, and then let compassion arise inwardly toward yourself and outwardly toward others. Because in the end, the teaching of the two arrows is not only about suffering, it is about love. It is about creating a life where pain does not harden us, but softens us into deeper humanity. And with that, chapter 1 reaches its close. You now hold the key to seeing pain differently, to responding wisely, and to walking a path of compassion. In the chapters to come, we will explore how this wisdom connects with science, with meditation, and with the challenges of modern life. But always remember, the journey begins right here, with the choice to put the second arrow down and to let compassion grow in its place. Science meets the Buddha's wisdom. Have you ever wondered why two people can look at the same event and see two completely different realities? Why one person finds beauty where another sees only disappointment, or why one moment of pain can grow into an endless storm inside one mind while fading quickly in another? The answer lies not in the world itself, but in the way our brains shape reality. Modern science tells us something astonishing. The brain is not a camera. It is not passively recording what is out there. It is a prediction machine. It guesses, it fills in gaps, and it constantly edits what you experience. And when you see this clearly, you realize how deeply it connects with the Buddha's teaching of the two arrows. This is why we call this teaching the brain as a prediction machine. Think about this for a moment. Light enters your eyes, sound enters your ears, sensations move through your body. But what you actually experience is not raw light, sound, or touch. What you experience is the brain's interpretation of them. If you have ever stared at an optical illusion, you know how strange this can be. A picture that seems to move, even though it is perfectly still. Two lines that are the same length, but one looks longer. Or perhaps the most famous example in recent years, the picture of the dress. Some people swore it was black and blue. Others were convinced it was white and gold. The photo never changed. The difference was in the minds that saw it. That is prediction at work. The Buddha understood this long before neuroscientists had brain scans. He pointed to perception, called sanya in Pali, and to mental formations, called sankhara. These are the ways the mind recognizes, interprets, and constructs experience. When you see a rope at dusk, your eyes send a vague signal. The brain guesses it is a snake. Fear shoots through your body. Your heart races. That is the second arrow in action, created not by the rope itself, but by the story the mind added. Later, when a lamp shows it is just a rope, you laugh. But in the moment, the suffering was real. Modern neuroscience explains this through predictive processing. The brain constantly builds models of the world. It predicts what is out there and compares those predictions with incoming data. If the prediction matches, you feel confident. If it does not, you feel surprised or even threatened. This is useful for survival. It helps you see danger before it is too late. But it also means you rarely see things as they are. You see what your brain expects, what your brain fears, what your brain desires, and that, the Buddha would say, is where second arrows are born. Again, this is the brain as a prediction machine, shaping not only what you see but also how deeply you suffer. Let's take an example from daily life. Imagine you send a message to a friend and hours go by without a reply. The first arrow is the small sting of waiting, but then your brain, using its prediction machine, fills in the gaps. They must be upset with me. I must have done something wrong. They don't value me anymore. None of this is reality. It is prediction. It is the brain's attempt to make sense of silence. And it hurts more than the silence itself. That is the second arrow. Or picture yourself walking into a meeting at work. A colleague looks at you briefly and then glances away. That is the raw event. Your brain takes it and predicts. They disapprove of me. They think I am unprepared. They don't respect me. Your heart races. Your palms sweat. Your mind spirals. But maybe they were just tired. Maybe they had a headache. Maybe it meant nothing at all. The suffering was not in their glance. It was in your prediction. Science calls this top-down processing. The brain does not build experience from the ground up, piece by piece. It starts with a guess, a framework, and then fits the incoming data into that mold. This saves energy and keeps you alive. But it also creates distortion, and it is in those distortions that so many second arrows hide. The Buddha described it more simply. He said the ordinary person is struck by two arrows. The first arrow is the unavoidable pain of life. The second arrow is the suffering created by the mind. In modern language, we might say, The first arrow is the raw signal, the data entering the senses. The second arrow is the prediction layered on top, the story, the fear, the memory, the expectation. Think about how often this happens. You hear a noise at night. The first arrow is the sound itself, but the second arrow says, "It must be an intruder. I am in danger." Your body surges with adrenaline, your heart pounds. Minutes later, you realize it was just the wind or a branch falling. The suffering was real, but it was born from prediction, not reality. Or consider illness. A small pain arises in your body. That is the first arrow. But your brain, fueled by memory and fear, predicts disaster. This could be serious. What if it never ends? What if it ruins my life? The second arrow strikes over and over, even if the pain itself is mild. Science shows that pain is amplified in the brain by attention and expectation. The Buddha showed the same thing with a single metaphor. One arrow becomes two. It is humbling to realize how little of what we experience is raw reality. Most of it is shaped, filtered, colored by the brain. And this is not a flaw in you alone. It is the condition of all human beings. The Buddha said, "Blind is the world. Few are those who truly see." He was not talking about physical blindness. He was talking about this blindness of perception, the blindness that makes us mistake predictions for truth, the blindness that fires second arrows without end. But here lies the hope. If the suffering is created by the mind, it can also be undone by the mind. If second arrows are born in prediction and interpretation, then awareness can break the cycle. Modern science confirms this too. When you bring attention to what is happening right now, the brain quiets its predictions. It stops filling in the gaps with fear and judgment. It begins to see more clearly. This is mindfulness, and it is the medicine for the prediction machine. Let's make this more personal. Have you ever been caught in an argument that you replayed for days? You thought about what you should have said, what they should have said, what it all meant. That was not the argument itself. That was your brain's prediction machine running wild, layering meaning, creating new arrows. Or have you ever been sure that someone was upset with you, only to find out later they were just busy or distracted? The second arrow had already struck, even though the first arrow was never real. Understanding the brain as a prediction machine gives you compassion for yourself. Of course, you fire second arrows. Your brain is designed to predict. It is not your personal failure. It is human nature. But just because it is natural does not mean it is inevitable. The Buddha offered a path of awareness, and science now shows us why it works. When you pay attention, prediction slows down. When you pause, the brain has room to update its guesses. When you breathe, the storm of second arrows begins to fade. This is the living reality of the brain as a prediction machine, and it explains why the Buddha's teaching still matters today. Imagine how your life might change if you practiced this daily. You feel the first arrow, pain, disappointment, fear. You notice the predictions rising, but instead of believing them, you pause. You say to yourself, "This is the mind predicting. This is not reality yet." You wait, you breathe, and slowly the second arrow dissolves. That is freedom, moment by moment. This is the beginning of chapter 2, where ancient wisdom meets modern science. The Buddha gave us a metaphor. Science gives us brain scans. Both are pointing to the same truth. Much of what we suffer is not in the world, but in the way we construct it. The good news is that what is constructed can be deconstructed, what is learned can be unlearned, and what feels like endless arrows can be put down, one by one, with awareness. Have you ever noticed how your mind can take one small moment of pain and turn it into an endless storm that lasts for days or even years? This is the power of rumination, the mental habit of replaying an experience over and over again, chewing on it like an old bone. Modern psychology gives this pattern a name, but the Buddha saw it thousands of years ago. He called it the second arrow, the suffering that does not come from the world, but from the mind itself. To understand rumination is to understand the heart of the Buddha's teaching. This is why we call this part rumination and the psychology of the second arrow. Think of a time when someone said something sharp to you. Maybe it lasted 3 seconds. A word, a tone, a gesture. That was the first arrow, quick and painful. But hours later, you are still thinking about it. Days later, you remember it again. At night, you rehearse comebacks you never said. Weeks later, the memory still burns. The actual event is gone. The person may not even remember, but you are still living inside it. That is rumination. That is the second arrow living rent-free in your mind. Psychologists describe rumination as a loop. Something happens, and instead of letting it pass, the mind circles back. It asks, why did this happen? What does it mean? What did I do wrong? What should I have done differently? The questions multiply, but they never lead to answers. They just create more questions, more doubt, more pain. The Buddha described it simply: when struck by an arrow, the ordinary person feels pain, and then they grieve, lament, and cling. They turn one arrow into 2, 2 into 10, 10 into 100. Have you ever had a sleepless night because your mind refused to stop? That is rumination at its peak. You lie in bed, hoping for rest, but the mind replays the same scene again and again. Maybe a mistake at work, maybe a conversation with a friend, maybe something you said years ago. The event is over. The first arrow is long gone. But the second arrow is fresh, fired again every time the memory rises. Science shows that rumination activates the same parts of the brain as real pain. That is why it feels so raw. That is why the body responds as if the wound were happening right now. The psychology of rumination explains why suffering lasts long after the cause is gone. The brain is not just remembering, it is reliving. It pulls the file out again, looks at it, analyzes it, reinterprets it, and in doing so, it reopens the wound. The Buddha did not use the word rumination, but he described it perfectly. He saw that the ordinary mind does not simply feel pain once. It feels it again and again because it clings to the story of pain. Imagine breaking a cup. The sound of it shattering is the first arrow. You feel a quick pang of regret. But then you start thinking, I'm so clumsy. I always do this. Why can't I be more careful? My whole life is a mess. Hours later you are still annoyed, not by the cup, but by the story. That is rumination. That is the second arrow multiplied 100 times. Modern therapy often teaches people to recognize rumination as a trap. Cognitive behavioral therapy says, notice when you are stuck in the loop and gently redirect your attention. The Buddha taught something similar. When a painful thought arises, know it as painful. When a craving arises, know it as craving. Do not identify with it. Do not make it me or mine. Just see it for what it is, another arrow you do not need to fire. Why do we ruminate? Because the brain believes it is solving a problem. When something painful happens, the mind says, if I think about it long enough, I will figure it out. I will find relief. But rumination is not problem solving. It is problem repeating. It is replay without resolution. It gives the illusion of control, but it actually deepens helplessness. That is why the Buddha pointed us toward awareness rather than endless thinking. He knew the mind cannot think its way out of suffering. It must see through it. Picture someone who lost their job. The first arrow is the shock and fear. But then rumination begins. Why did this happen to me? What if I never find another job? Maybe I'm useless. Maybe I'll fail at everything. Day after day, the loop continues. The second arrow grows sharper than the first. Modern psychology shows that rumination is one of the strongest predictors of depression. It is not the pain itself that breaks us. It is the way we replay it without end. Or think of heartbreak. The partner leaves, and the first arrow pierces the chest. The grief is heavy, but then the mind starts looping. What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough? Will I always be alone? How could they move on so easily? Each question is another arrow. Each replay is another wound. Months later, the body has healed, but the heart still aches because rumination is keeping the second arrow alive. The Buddha offered a different path. He said, see the feeling as a feeling. Do not add a story. Do not add a self. Simply know it, feel it, and let it pass. Modern science agrees. Mindfulness-based therapies have been shown to reduce rumination significantly. Why? Because mindfulness interrupts the loop. Instead of spinning in thoughts, you return to the breath, the body, the present moment. You see the second arrow forming, and you set it down before it pierces you again. Let's try a small practice right now. Bring to mind something that has been bothering you recently. Notice the first arrow, the actual event. Maybe it was a harsh word, a mistake, or a disappointment. Now notice the thoughts that come after. The blame, the questions, the rehearsed conversations. That is rumination. That is the second arrow. Take a slow breath, and as you exhale, whisper quietly, this is just the second arrow. I can put it down. Feel the relief, even if only for a moment. That is the beginning of freedom. When we understand rumination, we understand why the Buddha's teaching is timeless. He was not just talking about ancient monks in forests. He was talking about you and me, lying awake at night, replaying conversations, worrying about tomorrow, regretting yesterday. He was talking about the ordinary human mind, stuck in loops of suffering, and he was offering a way out. This is why this section is called Rumination and the Psychology of the Second Arrow. Because rumination is not just a psychological term, it is the lived reality of the second arrow in modern language. It is the bridge between ancient wisdom and contemporary science. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You realize how much of your pain is not from the world, but from the loops of your own mind. The good news is that loops can be broken, arrows can be put down, and every time you notice rumination, every time you pause, you are taking one step closer to freedom. When we speak of the two arrows, it can still feel abstract until we look at the moments in life that cut us most deeply. To see how the first arrow and the second arrow work, Let us turn to real situations that all of us face. Grief, illness, and failure are universal. No one escapes them. And yet the way we suffer through them differs dramatically. Some people are crushed under the weight of these experiences, while others move through them with remarkable resilience. The difference is not in the size of the arrow, but in whether we pick up the second one. This is why we call this part Case Studies of the Second Arrow, because these stories show clearly how suffering multiplies in daily life. Let us begin with loss. Imagine the death of someone you love. The first arrow is the ache in your chest, the emptiness in your home, the silence where once there was laughter. It is real. It hurts. No teaching will make that pain vanish. The Buddha never promised that we could avoid the pain of loss. But notice what happens next. The mind begins to weave stories. If only I had done more. If only I had said this before they left. Life is cruel. I will never be whole again. These thoughts are the second arrow. They take the raw pain of grief and layer it with guilt, anger, and despair. They turn a wound into a prison. And yet, when you understand the two arrows, you can begin to honor grief without stabbing yourself further. You can cry, you can feel the ache, and at the same time whisper to yourself, "This is the first arrow. I do not need to add the second." Think of illness. The body aches, the fever rises, or a diagnosis arrives that you never wanted to hear. This is the first arrow, sharp and undeniable. But for most of us, the second arrow comes quickly. What if this never ends? What if I lose everything? Why me? Fear multiplies the suffering. The imagination creates endless futures, each one darker than the last. Science tells us that pain signals in the body are amplified when the mind resists them. The Buddha told us the same truth long ago. He said the wise person feels the first arrow, but not the second. This means the wise person does not turn illness into identity. They feel pain in the body without adding despair in the mind. They acknowledge the arrow but do not fire another. Now consider failure. You put your energy into a project, a career, a dream, and it collapses. That sharp sting in the gut is the first arrow, but soon after comes the second. I'm worthless. I'll never succeed. Everyone is better than me. These stories wound far more than the failure itself. The first arrow says, "This attempt didn't work." The second arrow says, "You are a failure." And the difference between those two is the difference between resilience and despair. Let's look at these case studies more closely. Loss first. A mother loses her child. The pain is unbearable. The first arrow is grief itself. But then she blames herself endlessly. If only I had done this differently. If only I had been there 1 minute sooner. That second arrow never ends. But another parent, equally heartbroken, might still allow grief without blame. They might say, "This loss is beyond my control. I will cry, I will mourn, but I will not add the story that it was my fault." The difference is not in the love they felt, but in the arrows they refused to fire. Illness next. Imagine two patients diagnosed with the same condition. One says, "This is the end. My life is ruined." The second arrow has struck hard. The other says, "This is painful, yes, but I will face it one day at a time. I will not let fear define me." That person still carries the first arrow, but they are free from the second. Their body may be fragile, but their mind remains clear. Modern studies show that patients who meet illness with acceptance experience less stress and sometimes even heal faster. The Buddha saw the same truth. Suffering is not in the pain itself, but in the stories we tell around it. Failure too reveals the second arrow. A student fails an exam. The first arrow is disappointment, but if the student thinks, "I am stupid, I will never succeed," the wound grows deeper. Another student, facing the same failure, might say, "This is painful, but it is one moment, not my whole life. I will try again." Both feel the sting of the first arrow, but only one avoids the second. Case studies of the second arrow remind us that human suffering is not just about what happens to us, it is about what we add. We cannot stop death, sickness, or disappointment, but we can stop rumination, blame, and despair. That is the difference the Buddha was pointing toward. Think again about your own life. Can you remember a moment of loss, illness, or failure that you carried far longer than necessary? The first arrow was real, but how much of the pain came from the second arrow you kept firing? How many nights did you lose to rumination? How many days did you walk under the weight of a story that did not need to be told? Here is a small practice. Recall one case in your life. Perhaps a loss, perhaps an illness, perhaps a failure. Name the first arrow clearly. This is grief, or this is pain in the body, or this is disappointment. Then name the second arrow. This is blame, this is fear, this is self-judgment. Then breathe. And as you exhale, imagine placing the second arrow gently on the ground. It is still sharp, but you do not have to pick it up. Feel the relief of carrying only one arrow, not two. The Buddha never asked us to deny pain. He asked us to see clearly the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is the first arrow, suffering is the second. In these case studies, loss, illness, failure, we see how easily we add arrows to our own wounds. But we also see the hope. Every second arrow is optional. This section is called Case Studies of the Second Arrow because these examples show what the teaching looks like in everyday life. They are not distant theories. They are the moments we live, the heartbreaks we endure, the illnesses we face, the failures we carry. And in each one, there is a choice. The first arrow will come, but the second arrow is in your hands. 2,500 years ago, the Buddha spoke of the two arrows, showing that one arrow comes from life itself, and the second from the mind. Today, neuroscience is giving us a language to describe exactly how this happens. The brain is not a camera that records reality. It is a prediction machine, a storyteller, and sometimes a trickster. This is why we call this part neuroscience and rumination, because the science of the brain and the wisdom of the Dharma meet here in a way that feels almost miraculous. Think for a moment about how vision works. Light enters the eyes, but the picture you see is not just light. The brain fills in the gaps. It guesses what you are seeing based on past experiences. That is why optical illusions work. Two lines of the same length look different because your brain predicts depth, context, and shadows. Neuroscientists like Anil Seth describe perception as a controlled hallucination. The brain is always guessing and then correcting. In most cases, this helps us survive. But when it comes to pain, those guesses can amplify suffering. The first arrow is the raw signal. Nerves carry information to the brain. The cut on your skin, the ache in your chest, the sting of rejection. But then, the prediction machine takes over. It compares this pain to every pain you have ever felt. It projects what might happen next. It says, "This will get worse. This will never end. This is unbearable." And suddenly the pain is not just a signal in the body, it is a storm in the mind. That is the second arrow, created by the brain itself. Rumination is the brain's default mode when left unchecked. Neuroscience has identified something called the default mode network, a set of brain regions that activate when you are not focused on a task. It is the part of the brain that wanders, daydreams, and reflects. Useful for creativity, yes, but also the home of rumination. When the mind replays the past or worries about the future, the default mode network is active. This is the neuroscience of the second arrow. The Buddha warned us. The ordinary mind clings to pain, repeats it, and multiplies it. Modern scans now show this happening in real time inside the brain. Imagine someone who has just lost a job. The nerves fire the first arrow: stress, fear, disappointment. But then the default mode network ignites. It replays the moment again and again. It imagines the worst possible futures. It attaches identity. I am a failure. The person is no longer just feeling the sting of job loss. They are living in a constructed reality that the brain has built. That is neuroscience describing the same second arrow the Buddha described. Neuroscientists also talk about predictive coding. The brain does not wait passively for the world to strike. It predicts what will happen, and then it filters information based on those predictions. If you believe the world is hostile, you will see hostility even in neutral faces. If you believe you are unworthy, you will interpret silence as rejection. This is not imagination, it is the brain predicting and creating reality. And it is exactly why the Buddha said, "We see not the world as it is, but as we are." The science of prediction is simply a modern way of describing the second arrow. Pain studies confirm this as well. When people expect pain, the brain amplifies the signal. Anticipation makes the arrow sharper. But when people approach pain with acceptance, the brain registers less suffering. This matches the Buddha's teaching. The wise person feels only the first arrow. They do not add resistance. They do not collapse under the story. They simply know pain as pain and allow it to pass. Rumination in neuroscience is often measured by brain activity patterns. People who ruminate show prolonged activation in areas linked to self-referential thinking. In other words, the brain keeps looping around me, me, me. The Buddha pointed to the same trap with the concept of I-making. When pain arises, the mind says, "This is my pain. I am suffering. This defines me." That is the second arrow, and it is visible today in fMRI scans. So how do we bridge these two? The Buddha taught mindfulness, the simple act of paying attention without clinging. Neuroscience shows that mindfulness quiets the default mode network. People who practice regularly show less rumination, less self-referential looping. Their brains literally change. The pathways that fire the second arrow grow weaker, while the pathways of presence grow stronger. Science calls it neuroplasticity. The Buddha called it liberation. Different words, same truth. Consider a person with chronic pain. The first arrow is constant. The body aches daily. But whether they suffer endlessly or live with dignity depends on the second arrow. Neuroscience shows that mindfulness training reduces the activation of brain regions that amplify pain. Practitioners still feel the pain, but they no longer add the storm of fear and anger. They feel one arrow instead of many. This is not philosophy, it is biology. Or take depression. Much of depression is fueled by rumination. The mind replays failures, regrets, and fears. Neuroscience shows that rumination strengthens the very circuits that keep depression alive. But mindfulness interrupts those loops. Patients learn to see a thought as just a thought, not as reality. The Buddha said, "Feelings come and go. They are not self." Science now measures this shift in the brain. This is why this section is called Neuroscience and Rumination. Because when we look at the scans and see the loops, we are seeing the second arrow in scientific language. The Buddha described it in metaphor, and neuroscience describes it in data, but they are pointing to the same reality. We create much of our own suffering, and we can learn to stop. Think about how powerful this is. Ancient wisdom and modern science, two rivers flowing into one sea. The Buddha said the ordinary person suffers twice. Neuroscience shows why. The brain predicts, ruminates, and loops. The Buddha said the wise feel only one arrow. Neuroscience shows how mindfulness changes the circuits. It is not magic. It is training. It is practice. It is the path to freedom. So the next time you feel stuck in rumination, remember both truths. Remember the Buddha's voice saying, "Do not fire the second arrow." And remember the scientist showing the brain scan of rumination lighting up. Both are telling you the same thing. You have a choice. You cannot avoid the first arrow, but you can refuse the second. Take a breath now. Feel your body in this moment. Notice any tension, any thought looping in your mind. Name it gently. This is the second arrow, and then breathe out, releasing it like smoke into the air. This is not just a spiritual exercise, it is a neurological shift. Each time you do it, you rewire the brain. Each time you pause, you teach your mind a new path. Neuroscience and rumination together remind us that we are not helpless. The brain is plastic, changeable, trainable. Suffering is not destiny. The Buddha saw this. Science now confirms it. The arrows may come, but we do not have to wound ourselves again and again. We have walked through the ancient words of the Buddha, through the science of the brain, and through the many case studies of loss, illness, and failure. We have seen how the mind turns the first arrow into many, how rumination takes a single moment of pain and stretches it into hours, weeks, even years. Now it is time to turn all of this into something living, something you can carry in your hands and practice every day. This is the closing arc of our exploration, the practical integration and guided reflection that will allow Chapter 2 to settle not only in your mind but in your heart. Take a moment now and look back at what you have learned. The Buddha told us that pain is unavoidable, but suffering is optional. Neuroscience showed us that the brain is a prediction machine, often guessing badly, often looping in rumination. Psychology told us that rumination fuels anxiety and depression. Case studies revealed how easily we stab ourselves again and again. All of this is clear in theory, but theory is not enough. Knowledge is not enough. What matters is how you live when the arrow strikes, how you breathe when grief comes, how you walk when failure knocks, how you hold yourself when illness lingers. That is the practice. So let us begin here, in this simple moment. Sit as you are. You do not need to change anything. Place your feet on the ground, rest your hands lightly in your lap, and close your eyes if you wish. Feel the weight of your body. Feel the breath moving in and out. And now remember this teaching in the simplest way. Pain is the first arrow. Suffering is the second. Bring to mind something recent that hurt you. It does not need to be catastrophic. A small slight, a disappointment, a word that stung. Notice the first arrow. Where is it in your body? Perhaps a tightening in the chest, a warmth in the face, a heaviness in the stomach. Just notice it. Do not fight it. Do not label it as good or bad. Simply acknowledge, this is the first arrow. Now, notice the second arrow. What story did your mind add? Did you say, I'm not good enough? Did you think, they don't care about me? Did you whisper to yourself, this always happens, I'll never be free? That is the second arrow. It is not in your body, it is in the story. It is in the loops of the brain. And in this very moment, you have a choice. Take a deep breath, and as you exhale, imagine putting the second arrow down. Picture yourself holding a sharp arrow in your hand, one you have been pressing into your own wound. And now, gently, with compassion, set it down. Feel the relief of carrying only the first arrow. Yes, there is pain, but there is no need to multiply it. This is the practice of freedom. When you do this, you are not pretending pain doesn't exist. You are not covering it with false positivity. You are seeing clearly. You are training your mind to distinguish between what life gives you and what you add to it. And every time you practice, the pathways of rumination grow weaker. Neuroscience calls it neuroplasticity. The Buddha called it liberation. The language differs, but the truth is the same. Now imagine living your daily life with this awareness. Someone criticizes you. You feel the sting, the first arrow. You pause, breathe, and refuse the second arrow. Instead of replaying their words for days, you let them pass. Illness strikes your body. You feel the ache, the first arrow. You hold it gently, without adding stories of doom. Failure arrives at your door. You feel the disappointment, the first arrow. You honor it, and you move forward, without stabbing yourself with shame. This is what it means to integrate the teaching. It is not an abstract philosophy, it is a daily practice. It is the art of noticing, pausing, and choosing not to fire the second arrow. Each time you do this, you take back your power. Each time you do this, you grow freer. Now let us take this reflection a step deeper. Think about someone else in your life who is suffering. Perhaps they are drowning in grief. Perhaps they are sick. Perhaps they have failed in some way and cannot let go. See them clearly in your mind. And now imagine gently whispering to them, this is the first arrow, do not fire the second. Imagine them breathing. Imagine them setting down the story. Imagine them finding space inside their pain. When you do this, you are practicing compassion. You are extending the gift of this teaching to others. And now return to yourself. Place your hand lightly over your heart if you wish. Whisper silently, may I see the first arrow clearly. May I put down the second. May I live with wisdom. May I live with peace. Stay here for a few breaths. Let the words echo softly inside you. Let them plant seeds in your mind. The Buddha said, pleasant feelings come and go. Painful feelings come and go. The wise see them for what they are, and so they remain free. You too can be that wise person, not because you never feel pain, but because you learn not to multiply it. This is how science and Dharma meet. Science shows the loops of rumination in the brain. Dharma shows the arrows of suffering in the mind. Both point to the same door, and that door opens with awareness. It opens with compassion. It opens with practice. As we close this chapter, take one final deep breath. Feel your body as it is. Feel your mind as it is. And remember, the first arrow will always come. That is life. But the second arrow is in your hand. You can set it down. Again and again, you can set it down. And each time you do, you step closer to freedom, to clarity, to compassion. Carry this with you into the rest of your day. The arrows will come, but you do not need to wound yourself again and again. You are free to stop. You are free to breathe. You are free to live. The second arrow, in the digital age: stress, success, and the search for enough. Every era has its challenges, but our age has produced something new. A storm of constant demands, a flood of noise that never seems to end. You wake up in the morning, and before you've even taken your first conscious breath, the notifications are waiting. Messages, reminders, alerts, each one pulling at you, demanding your attention. By the time you've sat down with a cup of coffee, you've already fought 10 battles in your mind. This is what we call the modern storm. Stress and overload. A way of living that feels less like life and more like survival. Think about how quickly the day fills. Emails stack up like bricks in a wall. Deadlines loom like storm clouds. There are groceries to buy, children to care for, bills to pay. The body can handle tasks, but the mind adds weight. Every time you think, "I'll never finish this, I can't keep up, I'm already behind," you feel the second arrow piercing. The Buddha described it so simply. The first arrow is the reality of pressure. The second arrow is the story we create around it. And in the modern storm, those stories are constant. You know this feeling. You are rushing to work, late by only a few minutes. That is the first arrow. But then the mind erupts. "I'm always late. My boss will hate me. I'll never succeed. I'm a failure." The stress multiplies, not because of traffic, but because of the second arrow. Neuroscience shows the body releasing cortisol, the stress hormone, not only from the lateness itself, but from the fear-driven stories added on top. This is stress in the body and overload in the mind. The modern storm. Stress and overload is not only about big crises, it is about the 1,000 small cuts of a daily life that never pauses. You hear a phone buzz, and instead of one arrow of interruption, you fire 10 more. "I have to answer now. If I don't reply, they'll be angry. If I miss this, I'll lose everything." The phone is not the true enemy. It is your mind's belief that you must always be available, always responsive, always perfect. This is how a single ping becomes a storm. And yet, in the middle of this storm, the Buddha's wisdom still applies. Over 2,000 years ago, he spoke of the human tendency to add suffering to pain. He did not know email, deadlines, or smartphones, but he knew the mind. He knew how it clings, how it resists, how it multiplies fear. In our world, the arrows are digital, but the principle is timeless. Pain is inevitable. Stress will come, but suffering is optional, and overload is a choice, though most of us don't even realize we are choosing it. Imagine for a moment that you are carrying a backpack. The first arrow is the natural weight of life, the responsibilities, the tasks, the demands. The pack is heavy, but bearable. Now imagine that every time you think, "I can't handle this," or "I'm falling behind," you add a stone to the backpack. Soon it is crushing. The second arrow is the stone, and day after day, we load ourselves with stones until the weight is unbearable. This is the tragedy of stress in the modern world, but there is another way. Picture yourself in the same storm of deadlines and alerts. Instead of collapsing under the story, you pause, you take a breath, you say, "This is pressure, yes, but it is just the first arrow. I don't need to add more." In that moment, something shifts. The backpack is still there, but lighter. The stones remain on the ground. And with practice, you begin to walk differently. The storm is still around you, but it no longer defines you. Science confirms this. Studies show that people who practice mindfulness report less stress even when their workload is the same. Why? Because the body still feels the first arrow, but the mind refuses the second. They experience the meeting, the deadline, the late-night call, but they do not turn it into a story of failure or doom. The modern storm continues to rage, but they remain calm at the center. The modern storm. Stress and overload is not just an abstract phrase, it is the lived reality of millions. Think of a parent trying to balance work and children, always pulled in two directions. Think of a student drowning in assignments, convinced they are never enough. Think of yourself on the busiest day of the week, when everything seems to demand your attention at once. The arrows are everywhere, but the real suffering comes from the ones you fire yourself. Now pause and reflect on your own life. Where do you feel this storm most strongly? Is it at work, when the tasks never end? Is it at home, when responsibilities weigh heavy? Is it in the constant buzzing of your phone, when you feel chained to everyone else's needs? Wherever it is, stop and ask, what is the first arrow here, and what are the second arrows I am adding? That question alone can change everything. The Buddha offered a radical invitation. He did not promise to remove life's arrows. He promised freedom from the arrows we add. That promise is alive even now. In the middle of the modern storm, in the middle of stress and overload, you too can pause, breathe, and choose. Each time you do, you reclaim a little more of your life. Each time you do, the storm loses its power. And so we end this reflection where we began. The day may be full of demands, the world may be loud, the modern storm may rage on, but you are not helpless. You can feel the first arrow without firing the second. You can carry the backpack without adding stones. You can live in the storm without being destroyed by it. Take one breath right now, wherever you are. Feel the weight in your body. Feel the thoughts in your mind. And then, as you exhale, let one arrow drop. This is how freedom begins, not with a grand escape, but with a single breath, a single pause, a single choice. There is a unique kind of suffering that belongs to our time, a quiet ache that comes not from hunger or war, but from endless comparison. Never in human history have we been able to look into the lives of millions of people every day, seeing their happiest moments, their greatest achievements, their brightest smiles. And yet, this constant exposure has created one of the sharpest second arrows of our age. This is what we call comparison and social media illusions, a pattern that takes a simple moment of longing and turns it into deep dissatisfaction with life itself. Think about the last time you scrolled through your phone. You saw someone's vacation in a faraway place, someone's perfect relationship, someone's new home or career announcement. For a moment, there was a flicker inside you, a first arrow of longing, a natural human response. You thought, "That looks wonderful. I wish I could be there." That in itself is not harmful. It is the mind's natural response to beauty and success. But then the second arrow comes. Why not me? Everyone else is moving forward. I'm falling behind. My life is empty compared to theirs. What was once a passing glance becomes a wound, sharp and heavy. The Buddha warned about this tendency long before smartphones. In the Dhammapada, he spoke of envy and greed as fires that consume the heart. He understood that when we measure ourselves against others, we create suffering where none needs to exist. Social media has only magnified this ancient truth. The first arrow is the simple recognition of another's joy. The second arrow is the story, "I am less, I am not enough, I will never catch up." That second arrow cuts deeper than we realize, leaving invisible scars. Comparison and social media illusions are powerful because they present us with a false picture. No one posts their tears, their doubts, their nights of despair. They post the highlight reel. But when you look at that reel and compare it to your behind-the-scenes life, you are bound to feel unworthy. It is like comparing the surface of the ocean on a sunny day to the storm that rages under your own waves. The images are not lies, but they are incomplete. And in believing them fully, you shoot yourself with a second arrow over and over again. Picture a young student late at night, scrolling endlessly. They see their friends at parties, traveling, achieving. They feel the first arrow, the sting of longing, but then the mind takes over. They are all happier than me. I am alone. I am a failure. The sadness deepens, the chest tightens, sleep disappears. By morning, the second arrow has done more damage than the images ever could. The phone did not wound them. Their own mind did. Science confirms this cycle. Studies show that prolonged social media use often increases feelings of depression and anxiety, not because the platforms themselves are evil, but because of the way the mind interprets what it sees. The first arrow is a natural reaction. The second arrow is the rumination, the endless comparison, the false belief that everyone else's life is better. And the more we fire this arrow, the more we bleed inside. But here is the truth. The Buddha taught that no one escapes the arrows of life. Even those who post their smiling photos know pain. Even those who seem to have everything still wake up with fear, still suffer loss, still grow old, still die. Comparison blinds us to this. It makes us believe in illusions, that others live in a world free of arrows while we alone are pierced. This illusion is cruel, but it can be broken. Imagine looking at a photo of a friend on vacation. You feel the first arrow, longing, but instead of adding the second, you pause, you breathe. You say, "This is one happy moment in their life. I don't see their whole story. I don't need to add pain to my own." In that moment, you free yourself. You acknowledge the natural sting of envy, but you do not let it become poison. You let the image be just what it is, an image, not a verdict on your worth. The Buddha once said, "Do not look at the faults of others, or at what they have or have not done. Look at what you yourself have done and have not done." This is the antidote to comparison and social media illusions. Instead of drowning in what others show, return to your own path. Ask yourself, am I living with kindness? Am I practicing wisdom? Am I walking steadily? These questions ground you in reality, while comparison pulls you into illusion. Reflect on this now. How many times today did you wound yourself with the second arrow of comparison? When you saw someone's success, did you turn it into your failure? When you saw someone's joy, did you make it your sorrow? These are illusions, not truths. They are stories the mind tells, not reality. And once you see them clearly, you can let them go. There is a practice you can try right now. The next time you feel envy on social media, pause. Notice the first arrow, I wish I had that. Feel it honestly, without shame. Then notice the second arrow, I am less, I am nothing, I am behind. Label it gently as illusion. Say softly, this is just the second arrow. I do not need to fire it. Breathe and let it go. Watch how the envy passes when you refuse to feed it with stories. Comparison and social media illusions will always tempt you. The world will always show you bright surfaces and polished moments. But you are not powerless. You can remember that everyone carries arrows, even if you cannot see them. You can remember that your worth is not measured in likes or views or possessions. You can remember that the second arrow is optional, and you can choose to set it down. As you listen to these words, take a breath. Feel your own life as it is, with its joys and its struggles. Do not measure it against anyone else. Do not hold it up to an illusion. Simply hold it as yours. In that simple act, the storm of comparison begins to calm. You discover peace, not by changing the world, but by refusing to wound yourself with the second arrow. There is a hunger that drives much of our modern life. From the time we are children, we are told to do more, to achieve more, to climb higher. Report cards, competitions, awards, each one plants a seed that whispers, your worth depends on your success. As adults, that seed grows into a relentless voice. It tells us that if we do not achieve, if we do not win, if we are not constantly moving forward, we are failures. This is what we call the pressure to succeed and the myth of perfection. It is one of the most powerful second arrows of our age, a wound that we create in our own minds by believing that being human is never enough. Think about the culture we live in. Every billboard, every advertisement, every post online screams at us to become more. A bigger house, a better body, a higher salary, more recognition. The first arrow is natural, the desire to grow, to provide for ourselves and those we love. The Buddha never denied that. He understood the natural striving of life, the wish to improve. But the second arrow comes when growth turns into obsession, when ambition turns into identity. It whispers, unless I am perfect, I am nothing. Unless I am the best, I am worthless. That arrow does more damage than any failure ever could. Imagine a student working day and night, exhausted and anxious. The first arrow is the heavy workload, the exams, the pressure of deadlines. But the second arrow is the belief, if I don't get the highest grade, I am a disappointment. If I fail once, my life is ruined. This belief steals joy not only from the failures, but also from the successes. Even when the student achieves, the voice says, it's not enough, you must do more. This is the myth of perfection at work. Or picture an executive chasing promotion after promotion, They reach the top, but instead of peace, they feel emptier than ever. Why? Because the myth of perfection never allows rest. The second arrow is always ready. Yes, you succeeded, but look at them. They are still ahead. You should already be further. You are still not enough. In this way, the mind creates a cage. No matter how far you climb, you are never free. The Buddha taught the middle path for precisely this reason. He saw that the extremes of indulgence and deprivation both lead to suffering. In the same way, the extremes of success and perfectionism lead to suffering today. The first arrow may be the natural desire to provide, to grow, to express our potential. But the second arrow is the trap of identification, of measuring our entire self against an impossible standard. That second arrow pierces the heart, because it makes life itself into a competition we can never win. The pressure to succeed and the myth of perfection are fueled not only by culture, but also by biology. Neuroscience tells us that our brains are wired with a dopamine system, always chasing the next reward. When you achieve a goal, dopamine spikes. But it quickly fades, leaving you hungry for more. The mind then fires the second arrow. What you have is not enough. You need the next thing. This cycle is endless. It keeps us running like hamsters in a wheel, exhausted but never satisfied. Consider your own life. How often have you said to yourself, "I will rest when this project is done, when I get that promotion, when I buy that house"? And yet, when you reach that milestone, another arrow is waiting. Rest never comes, peace never arrives, because the mind is already chasing the next thing. This is how the myth of perfection steals our lives. It tells us that happiness is always elsewhere, always later, always out of reach. But the Buddha's wisdom points us back to the present. He reminds us that peace is not found in endless achievement, but in freedom from the second arrow. You can work hard, yes. You can strive, yes. But you do not have to measure your entire being against the outcome. You can let success be just success, and failure be just failure. Neither defines who you are, neither holds your worth. There is a story of a monk who trained tirelessly, always pushing himself to meditate longer, harder, more intensely. He grew sick, weary, and discouraged. One day the Buddha told him, "Just as a lute string that is too tight will snap, and one that is too loose will not play, so too must your practice be tuned." This is the middle path, neither laziness nor perfectionism, but a balance that allows harmony. The same applies to our modern lives. Too tight, and we snap. Too loose, and we lose our way. But tuned with wisdom, life becomes music. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, where in your life are you holding the string too tight? Where are you piercing yourself with the second arrow of perfection? Is it in your career, your studies, your appearance, your relationships? Notice how the pressure to succeed has created suffering, not from the first arrow of effort, but from the second arrow of identity. Notice how the myth of perfection whispers that nothing you do will ever be enough. And see clearly, that whisper is not truth. It is illusion. The practice here is simple, but not easy. The next time you achieve something, pause before rushing on. Notice the first arrow of effort, the real challenge you faced. Then notice the second arrow, the voice that says, "It's not enough." See it, name it, and let it go. Breathe and say, "This moment is enough. I am enough." Each time you do this, you loosen the string. You let life sing again. The pressure to succeed and the myth of perfection will always tempt us. The world will always reward busyness, always glorify hustle, always praise perfection. But you do not have to believe the myth. You can walk the middle path. You can work, strive, grow, and yet remain free. You can achieve without being consumed. You can fail without being destroyed. You can live without firing the second arrow. And so we arrive at a truth as old as the Buddha and as urgent as today. The real danger is not in failing to succeed, but in believing that success defines you. The real poison is not in imperfection, but in believing perfection is the only path. Once you see this clearly, the storm begins to calm. You are free to breathe. You are free to rest. You are free to live. Take one deep breath now. Feel the weight of your own striving, the pressure you carry, and as you exhale, imagine setting down one arrow. Imagine loosening the string. Imagine saying softly, "I am enough, right here, right now." In that moment, the myth of perfection begins to dissolve, and the path of freedom opens before you. We live in an age unlike any before. From the moment we wake, a phone buzzes at our bedside. Before our feet even touch the floor, the day has already begun to pull us in 100 directions. Emails, messages, news, endless streams of information, all demanding attention, all whispering that we cannot afford to look away. This is the digital storm, and for many of us, it feels impossible to escape. It is here that we must talk about breaking the digital chains, mindfulness in a hyper-connected world, because if we do not learn to step back, the second arrows of distraction, anxiety, and exhaustion will pierce us again and again. The first arrow in our hyper-connected world is simple: information. Notifications arrive, tasks need attention, people want to connect. These are the unavoidable facts of modern life. But the second arrow comes from how we relate to them. We tell ourselves, if I don't check right now, I'll miss something important. If I don't reply immediately, they'll be upset. If I don't stay plugged in, I'll fall behind. That belief turns a single vibration in our pocket into a source of constant stress. The phone does not wound us, the story we build around it does. Picture yourself working on something meaningful, perhaps a project you've been longing to complete. The first arrow is the challenge of concentration itself, the natural wandering of the mind. But then your phone lights up. A message appears. You glance at it, and before you know it, 10 minutes are gone. The second arrow pierces. I am so easily distracted. I can't focus. I'm never productive enough. Not only have you lost time, you've wounded yourself with judgment. The chain grows tighter. The Buddha never saw a smartphone, but he understood the restless mind. He described it as a monkey, leaping from branch to branch, never still, always searching. Our devices have become branches in that jungle, and the mind jumps endlessly among them. Breaking the digital chains, mindfulness in a hyper-connected world is not about destroying the jungle, it is about training the monkey. It is about learning to return, again and again, to presence. Consider the modern ritual of scrolling late into the night. You are tired, your body longs for rest, but your thumb keeps swiping. One video leads to another, one article to the next. The first arrow is fatigue, the body's natural limit. But the second arrow is the belief, just one more, I can't stop now. Before you know it, hours are gone, and the next day begins heavy with regret. The body suffers, but the mind suffers even more. Science has studied this loop. Each notification, each like, each new message releases a tiny drop of dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. For a moment, it feels good, but the reward fades quickly, and the brain craves more. This is how the digital world chains us, not with iron, but with chemicals and illusions. The first arrow is the natural pull of curiosity. The second arrow is the endless chase, the belief that fulfillment is always one click away. But the Buddha offered an antidote centuries before the invention of screens: mindfulness. To be mindful is to see clearly what is happening without being swept away. Imagine holding your phone and hearing the buzz. Instead of reacting, you pause, you breathe. You say, "This is a sound. This is a vibration. The first arrow has arrived, but I do not need to add a second arrow. I do not need to tell a story of urgency or fear." That pause, that breath, is the breaking of a chain. Breaking the digital chains. Mindfulness in a hyper-connected world does not mean rejecting technology. It does not mean abandoning work, ignoring family, or fleeing to the mountains. It means using the tools without being used by them. It means choosing when to connect instead of being driven by every ping. It means creating space for silence in a world that never stops shouting. There is a practice you can begin today. Choose one small window of time, perhaps the first 10 minutes after waking or the last 10 minutes before bed. In that time, do not touch your phone. Simply sit, breathe, notice your thoughts. The first arrow may be restlessness. Your mind will say, check it, you might be missing something. That is the second arrow, fear of missing out. Watch it, name it, let it go. You will discover that nothing collapses if you do not check. The world remains, but your heart begins to open. Or try this. When you eat, put your device aside. Taste the food. Notice its texture, its flavor, the way it nourishes you. The first arrow may be habit, the urge to scroll while chewing. The second arrow is the judgment. This is boring without the phone. I can't just sit here. But if you stay with the moment, you may rediscover something simple and profound: the joy of just eating, the taste of life itself. Breaking the digital chains. Mindfulness in a hyper-connected world also means being gentle with yourself. Many people hear this teaching and think, I am addicted, I am weak, I can't stop. That too is a second arrow. Do not add shame to the struggle. Instead, bring compassion. Say, yes, this habit is strong, but I can choose differently, one breath at a time. Each time you return to presence, you loosen the chain. Think of your mind as a clear lake. Every notification is a stone tossed in, creating ripples. If you chase each ripple, you drown. But if you sit quietly on the shore, the ripples settle, the water clears. You see the sky reflected again. This is mindfulness in action. This is freedom in a world of noise. Pause now and take a breath. Feel the weight of your own digital chains. Notice how often you reach for your phone without thinking, how often you open an app without intention. That is the first arrow. Now notice the second arrow, the stories you add. I can't live without this. I'm falling behind. Everyone needs me right now. See how those stories tighten the chain, and in seeing them, you can begin to let them go. The Buddha said, with our thoughts, we make the world. Today, our devices are part of that world. They can be tools for connection, learning, even for sharing compassion, but they can also be weapons we turn against ourselves. The choice is ours. We can live chained to the noise, or we can break the chains with awareness, breaking the digital chains. Mindfulness in a hyper-connected world is not a single act. It is a practice, a way of living. Each pause, each breath, each small choice to be present is a link undone. And as the links fall away, you discover something you may have forgotten: the silence within you, the space untouched by pings and buzzes, the peace that has always been waiting. So let us end this part with a simple reflection. Put your device down for just a moment. Close your eyes if you wish. Take a slow breath in and a gentle breath out. Feel the ground beneath you, the air around you. This moment is yours. No notification can take it away. This peace is here, now, in you. And as you return to the noise of the world, remember, the arrows will always come, but the second arrow is in your hand. The chain will always tempt you, but you have the key. With mindfulness, you can live connected, but not controlled, busy, but not broken, online, but still free. When we look back on this journey through stress, comparison, perfection, and digital chains, a simple truth emerges. The modern world is full of arrows. They arrive through deadlines, through screens, through expectations, through the endless noise of society. The Buddha could never have imagined email or social media, but he understood the human mind. He saw that pain will always be part of life, yet suffering is something we create. Today, as we come to the closing arc of this chapter, we turn toward a vision of finding balance and peace in the modern world. Finding balance and peace in the modern world does not mean rejecting progress. It does not mean fleeing to the mountains or abandoning technology. It means learning to live in harmony with the tools and challenges of our time. The arrows of stress, comparison, perfectionism, and distraction will always exist. But balance comes when we stop firing the second arrow, when we stop turning life into a battle against ourselves. Imagine beginning your day not with a rush of panic, but with a pause. Before looking at your phone, you breathe deeply. You feel your feet on the floor. You remind yourself, I will be struck by first arrows today, but I will not add the second. Already, the day begins differently. This is the essence of finding balance and peace in the modern world. It is not about controlling everything outside you. It is about choosing how you meet what arises within you. Think of stress. The first arrow is the work itself, the tasks waiting to be done. The second arrow is the story. I can't handle this. I'm falling behind. Balance means feeling the first arrow without picking up the second. Peace means working with clarity instead of panic, moving steadily instead of collapsing. Think of comparison. The first arrow is seeing someone else succeed. The second arrow is the thought, I'm not enough. I'll never measure up. Balance means celebrating their success while honoring your own path. Peace means remembering that your worth is not measured against another person's highlight reel. Think of perfectionism. The first arrow is the desire to do well. The second arrow is the belief, if I'm not perfect, I'm worthless. Balance means striving with effort, but not with obsession. Peace means remembering that you are already whole, even in imperfection. Think of digital chains. The first arrow is the buzz of the phone, the constant flow of messages. The second arrow is the compulsion. I must respond now. I must always be available. Balance means using the tools wisely without being used. Peace means putting the phone down and reclaiming the silence that has always been yours. Finding balance and peace in the modern world also means rediscovering the simple joys of life. A cup of tea enjoyed without distraction, a walk taken without headphones, a conversation where you truly listen instead of thinking about your reply. These moments seem small, but they are seeds of freedom. Each one weakens the habit of second arrows. Each one reminds you that peace is not far away. It is here, in the ordinary moments we so often overlook. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." In our time, that wisdom might sound like this: better than 1,000 notifications is one deep breath. Better than endless scrolling is one moment of presence. Better than chasing perfection is one act of compassion. This is the heart of balance. Finding balance and peace in the modern world also asks us to be gentle with ourselves. We will still get lost. We will still fire second arrows. We will still compare, still rush, still chase illusions. But every time we notice, every time we pause, we step closer to freedom. The practice is not about perfection. It is about returning, again and again, to awareness. So let us close with a practice. Sit comfortably wherever you are. Take a slow, deep breath in and a gentle breath out. Feel your body resting on the earth. Let your shoulders soften. Now bring to mind the arrows of your own life. Perhaps stress at work, or comparison online, or the tug of your phone. See the first arrow clearly. Feel its weight. And then notice the second arrow, the stories you tell, the judgments you add. With each exhale, imagine setting one arrow down. Feel the space that opens as the burden lightens. Whisper softly to yourself, "I am learning balance. I am learning peace. I am enough." Stay with this feeling for a few breaths. Notice how the storm quiets, even for a moment. This is what it means to walk the path of freedom in a modern world. As we conclude Chapter 3, remember this: stress, comparison, perfection, distraction, these will not disappear. But you can meet them differently. You can let the first arrow be the only arrow. You can live with balance, with clarity, with compassion, and in doing so, you discover that peace is not something far away, waiting for a perfect future. Peace is here, in this moment, waiting for you to choose it. This is the gift of the Dharma in our time. The ancient wisdom of the Buddha, shining like a lamp in the storm of modern life. The world may be louder than ever, faster than ever, more demanding than ever, but the truth has not changed. Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional, and peace is always possible. So as you step forward, carry this teaching with you. When the arrows come, pause. When the pressure rises, breathe. When the noise grows unbearable, remember the silence within. This is your refuge. This is your strength. This is your way of finding balance and peace in the modern world. There are places in life where pain strikes us more deeply than anywhere else. These are not the battlefields of history, nor the news headlines of the world, but the quiet rooms of our own homes. The people who share our meals, who sit beside us on ordinary evenings, who know the sound of our laughter and the weight of our silence, these are the ones who can pierce us with arrows we never expect. This is the heart of the arrows in our closest bonds. Think of a family argument. Perhaps it begins with something small, a careless word, a forgotten chore, a misunderstanding. The first arrow is immediate, the sting of hurt in the chest, the rise of heat in the face. Pain is natural here. After all, when love runs deep, so too does sensitivity. But then comes the second arrow, sharp and invisible. The mind whispers, "They never respect me. They never truly cared. This always happens. They will never change." Suddenly, a single disagreement becomes a heavy story about years of disappointment. The wound multiplies, not because of what was said, but because of the arrows we fire into ourselves. The Buddha knew this truth well. He spoke often of how craving and clinging intensify suffering, especially in our closest relationships. He was not telling us to withdraw from family or to abandon love, but to see clearly the difference between the first arrow, the real pain of the moment, and the second arrow, the story that chains us to resentment. In the arrows in our closest bonds, this difference is everything. Without that awareness, one sharp word at dinner can echo for decades. Consider the bond between parent and child. A parent in frustration says something harsh. The first arrow is the hurt of those words, the disappointment of not being seen or understood. But then the second arrow follows. "I must not be good enough. I will never meet their expectations. I am unworthy." That story can linger for years, shaping how a child sees themselves long after the parent has forgotten the remark. And yet, when we pause and notice, we see that the wound was multiplied not by the original pain, but by the endless replay of the second arrow. Or think of a spouse or partner. A moment of silence at the wrong time, a gesture misunderstood, a conversation cut short. The first arrow is the ache of feeling ignored, but then the mind adds, "They don't love me anymore. This relationship is falling apart. I am destined to be alone." Suddenly, what might have been a fleeting moment becomes a storm of insecurity. In the arrows in our closest bonds, this is how we often wound ourselves far more than our loved ones ever intended. Even siblings, who share years of laughter and struggle, can shoot arrows without meaning to. A careless comparison, "Why can't you be more like them?" lands like the first arrow. The second arrow then grows. "I will never be enough. I will always be in their shadow." Here again, the pain that lasts is not the arrow of words, but the arrow of the story we keep alive. The Buddha described family life as fertile ground for practice, because love and attachment are so deeply intertwined. The bonds that bring us joy are also the bonds that test our patience. It is here, in the heart of our closest bonds, that mindfulness becomes most necessary. Without it, we keep turning ordinary conflicts into lifelong resentments. With it, we begin to see arrows for what they are: moments of pain, not eternal verdicts on our worth. Imagine sitting across from someone you love after a fight. The air is heavy, the silence sharp. The first arrow has already landed. You feel it in the tightness of your chest, the ache of your heart. But then you catch yourself before firing the second. You take a breath. You say inwardly, "This hurts, yes, but it is only one arrow." That pause, that simple awareness, can change the entire course of the relationship. Instead of building a wall of resentment, you open a door to healing. The arrows in our closest bonds teach us that the people we love most are often the ones who can wound us most, but they are also the ones with whom we can practice the deepest compassion. When you remember that your spouse, your parent, your child, or your sibling also carries their own arrows, you soften. You see that their harsh words may have come from their own pain, their own second arrows, and in that recognition, forgiveness begins. Think of a father who grew up with harshness, carrying his own arrows of criticism. When he speaks sharply to his child, he is not only shooting a first arrow into them, he is also acting out the second arrows he never put down. If the child grows mindful, they may still feel the sting, but they may also see, this is not about me. This is about the pain he carries. In that clarity, the cycle of arrows can finally end. The practice here is not to deny the first arrow. Pain in families is real. Disrespect hurts. Rejection cuts deep. But the path of freedom is to refuse the second arrow, to refuse to let one moment become a lifelong chain. The Buddha said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love." This is the eternal law. In our closest bonds, this means choosing compassion over resentment, choosing presence over stories, choosing to put down the second arrow. There is a meditation you can try right now. Bring to mind someone close to you who has hurt you recently. Feel the first arrow, the raw pain of the event. Do not deny it. Let it be what it is. Then notice the second arrow, the story your mind adds, the judgments, the conclusions. With a slow breath, imagine setting that second arrow down. Say quietly, "This is only one arrow. I do not need to add another." Stay with that feeling for a few breaths. Notice the space that opens. Notice how compassion has room to grow. The arrows in our closest bonds remind us that healing begins not when others change, but when we stop hurting ourselves. The first arrow is unavoidable, but the second arrow is in our hand, and we can choose to lay it down. In doing so, we create space for forgiveness, for patience, for deeper love. As you reflect on your own closest bonds, family dinners, quiet evenings, arguments and reconciliations, remember this: the people who can wound you most are also the people who can teach you most about compassion. Every arrow is an invitation to see more clearly, to soften more deeply, to love more wisely. And so, the next time pain arises, in your family, in your marriage, in your home, pause, feel the first arrow, but do not reach for the second. Let the wound be just what it is, no more, no less. In that simple choice lies the possibility of peace not only for you, but for everyone bound to you by love. This is the heart of the arrows in our closest bonds. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Love will always bring arrows, but it can also bring healing. And when we choose compassion over stories, presence over resentment, we discover that our closest bonds are not prisons of pain, but paths to awakening. Friendship is one of the sweetest gifts of being human. Unlike family, which we are born into, friendship is chosen. We extend our hand to another person and say, in effect, "I see you. I want to walk beside you." A friend is someone who shares our laughter, listens to our fears, and stands near us when the world feels heavy. And yet, because friendship runs so deep in the heart, it is also a place where arrows can land. This is the heart of friendship, trust, and disappointment. Think of a time when a close friend forgot to call you back. The first arrow was small but sharp, the sting of being forgotten. It felt like silence where you expected care. But then the second arrow struck. The mind whispered, "They don't value me. Maybe I was never really important. Maybe I was just convenient for them." The wound grew, not from what happened, but from the story added on top. This is how the second arrow works in friendship. The hurt of the moment multiplies into days of distance, weeks of coldness, and sometimes the end of a bond that could have been healed. Friendship, trust, and disappointment show us how fragile trust can be. A cancelled plan becomes not just a single evening alone, but a story of abandonment. A harsh word in jest becomes not just a joke gone wrong, but a belief that our friend never respected us. The arrows multiply until the bond feels broken. And yet, when we pause and breathe, we see clearly. The first arrow was real but small. The second arrow was the one that truly tore the bond. The Buddha once said that wise friendship is the whole of the spiritual life. He meant that who we walk with shapes our path, but he also knew that even wise friendships carry pain. No relationship is without arrows. What matters is not to demand perfection from our friends, but to learn how to meet disappointment without stabbing ourselves again. Imagine a friend who forgets your birthday. The first arrow lands, you feel hurt, unseen, overlooked. But then the second arrow arrives. I must not matter. No one remembers me. I am invisible. That story may linger for years, coloring every interaction. But what if you could pause and say instead, "This hurts, yes, but it is only one arrow. Perhaps they were busy. Perhaps they forgot. This does not erase the friendship." In that moment, you refuse the second arrow, and the friendship has space to breathe again. Friendship, trust, and disappointment remind us that our closest bonds outside of family are mirrors. When we feel let down by a friend, we often discover not just their flaw, but our own wound. A missed call touches our fear of being unworthy. A sharp word awakens old memories of rejection. A moment of distance feeds the story that we are always left behind. These are not just arrows from outside. They are arrows we have been carrying for years, and friendship gives us a chance to finally see them. Consider two friends walking together through hardship. One day, one of them is distracted, distant, unable to listen well. The other feels the first arrow, the disappointment of not being heard. But instead of firing the second arrow, they pause and ask, "Are you okay? You seem heavy today." That simple question transforms the moment. What could have become resentment becomes compassion. What could have ended a friendship deepens it. This is the power of refusing the second arrow. The Buddha's teaching is clear. When we see feelings as just feelings, and not as a self, we are free. In friendship, this means seeing that a missed text, a forgotten promise, a thoughtless remark are not verdicts on our worth. They are simply arrows, painful, yes, but temporary. It is the stories we add that break trust beyond repair. There is a meditation you can practice for friendship. Bring to mind someone you feel disappointed by. Notice the first arrow, the specific event that hurt you. Let it be what it is. Then notice the second arrow, the thoughts you added. They don't care. I don't matter. This friendship was false. Take a slow breath, and as you exhale, imagine setting the second arrow down. Whisper inwardly, "This is only one arrow. I do not need to fire another." Feel the space that opens up. In that space, compassion can return. Friendship, trust, and disappointment are not just about pain, they are about opportunity. Every time a friend hurts us, we are given a choice. Do we close down, or do we open up? Do we build a wall, or do we build a bridge? The first arrow is inevitable, but the second arrow is optional. And in choosing to lay down the second arrow, we keep the bond alive. Think of a long friendship. Over years there will be countless arrows, missed calls, forgotten favors, misunderstandings, moments of distance, but there will also be laughter, support, forgiveness, and love. If we fire a second arrow at every wound, the friendship will collapse under the weight of stories. But if we keep putting the second arrow down, the bond can last a lifetime. So the next time you feel disappointment in a friend, pause. Feel the first arrow, but do not rush to the second. Ask instead, what story am I adding? What is real here, and what is my fear? In that clarity, trust can be restored. In that space, disappointment can become understanding. And in that wisdom, friendship can become a practice of compassion itself. Friendship, trust, and disappointment show us that the arrows in friendship do not need to destroy us. They can teach us patience, humility, and love. They can show us how to forgive, how to see clearly, how to stay open even when it hurts. And in staying open, we discover that friendship is not fragile after all. It is resilient, because it is rooted not in perfection, but in compassion. So remember, a friend's mistake is the first arrow. Your story about it is the second. One you cannot avoid. The other you can always choose to lay down. And in that choice lies the future of your friendship. Love is perhaps the most powerful force in human life. It draws us together, binds us in intimacy, and gives meaning to our days. To love and be loved is one of the deepest human needs. Yet because love runs so deep, the arrows of suffering can strike with equal depth. This is the heart of love, intimacy, and the second arrow of attachment. Think of the first days of falling in love. The world feels brighter, every word is charged with meaning, every glance a spark. The joy is undeniable, but soon, as intimacy grows, so does vulnerability. The closer we hold another person, the more power they have to wound us. A small misunderstanding, a forgotten promise, a cold tone of voice, these become arrows that pierce the heart more sharply than any insult from a stranger ever could. The first arrow in love is the natural pain of being human together. No one is perfect. Even the most caring partner sometimes speaks carelessly, forgets, or falters. But the second arrow is the storm of attachment that follows. The mind whispers, if they loved me, they would never do this. Maybe they don't really care. Maybe I will be abandoned. I cannot survive without them. This second arrow turns one moment of pain into an earthquake of fear, love, intimacy, and the second arrow of attachment remind us that intimacy is both beauty and risk. When we cling tightly to our partner, believing our happiness depends entirely on them, every small wound feels like disaster. The Buddha warned of this kind of attachment. He taught that craving tanha is the root of suffering. In love, craving often hides beneath devotion. We say, I need you, I cannot live without you, thinking it is romance, when in truth it is bondage. Imagine a partner who forgets an anniversary. The first arrow is the sting of disappointment, the sadness of being overlooked. But the second arrow says, I am unloved, I am forgotten, this relationship is failing. That story hurts far more than the forgotten date. Or imagine a lover who is distracted, slow to answer messages. The first arrow is the ache of waiting. The second arrow says, They are losing interest. I am being replaced. I am not worthy of love. That arrow can destroy trust, not because of what is real, but because of what the mind imagines. The Buddha's wisdom shines here. He never told us not to love. He told us to love without clinging, to hold intimacy as a flower cherished but not gripped. When we see love clearly, we still feel the first arrow, but we refuse the second. We let the wound be a moment, not a story of doom. We let intimacy breathe instead of strangling it with fear. Love, intimacy, and the second arrow of attachment also teach us about expectation. Many relationships collapse not from betrayal, but from the silent arrows of unmet expectations. We expect our partner to always understand us, to always respond quickly, to always know what we need without words. When they fall short, as they inevitably will, the first arrow stings. But the second arrow builds a story. They never listen. They don't care. They are not enough. Over time, the second arrow does more damage than any actual mistake. Think of two people sitting together after a disagreement. One feels hurt, the other feels misunderstood. The air is thick with silence. The first arrows have already landed. But what happens next decides the future. If each fires second arrows, "You never love me, you always blame me," the wound deepens into resentment. But if even one pauses and says, "This hurt me, but I know it is only one arrow, let's talk," then healing begins. The Buddha spoke of metta, loving kindness, as the antidote to these arrows. Metta does not demand perfection. It does not cling. It simply wishes, "May you be well. May you be happy. May you be free from suffering." When intimacy is rooted in metta instead of attachment, the arrows lose their power. The first arrow still stings, but the second arrow never arrives. There is a meditation you can try for love. Close your eyes and bring to mind your partner or someone you love deeply. Feel the warmth of that bond. Now recall a recent hurt, a disappointment. Notice the first arrow sharp, undeniable. Then notice the second arrow, the story you added. "They don't care. They will leave. I am unworthy." Take a slow breath. As you exhale, whisper, "This is the second arrow. I choose to lay it down." Then repeat silently, "May I love without clinging. May I care without fear. May I see this bond clearly." Love, intimacy, and the second arrow of attachment show us that the greatest joy can also be the greatest teacher. Every moment of intimacy is a chance to practice awareness, to distinguish between the first arrow of real pain and the second arrow of imagined suffering. The more we see clearly, the more we can love freely. Think of a couple who has been together for decades. They have faced illness, loss, financial struggle. They have hurt each other with words, disappointed each other in countless ways. Yet they remain together, not because they never felt arrows, but because they learned not to multiply them. They let the first arrow pass, and they put the second arrow down again and again. In that choice, love endured. So remember, in intimacy, the arrows will always come. You cannot avoid the sting of disappointment, the ache of distance, the pain of misunderstanding. But you can refuse the second arrow. You can choose not to build stories of doom, not to bind yourself in fear. You can choose to love without clinging. This is the wisdom of love, intimacy, and the second arrow of attachment. Love fully, but do not mistake your partner for your oxygen. Cherish intimacy, but do not chain it with fear. Feel the first arrow, but let it be only one. And in that freedom, love becomes not a prison, but a path to awakening. Work is where many of us spend most of our waking hours. Community is the circle we move in every day, the colleagues, neighbors, and groups that shape our sense of belonging. These places, meant for cooperation and shared purpose, can also be the ground where arrows fly fast. This is the essence of workplace, community, and the arrows of misunderstanding. Think of a meeting at work. A colleague makes a sharp comment, perhaps without intending harm. The first arrow lands, you feel embarrassed, stung by criticism in front of others. But then the second arrow comes. The mind whispers, "They hate me. I will never be respected here. Everyone must think I am a failure." That second arrow burns far longer than the first. Hours later, you are still replaying it in your head. Days later, you feel anxious to even enter the same room. The workplace becomes not just a place of tasks, but a battlefield of invisible wounds. The same happens in community life. A neighbor makes a careless remark. A leader overlooks your effort. The first arrow is small, yet the second arrow multiplies it into resentment, gossip, division. Soon the bonds of community weaken, not because of the original pain, but because of the stories that followed. Workplace, community, and the arrows of misunderstanding show us that misunderstanding is not just about words, it is about the layers of meaning we add afterward. The Buddha taught that perception, sanya, is like a lens. We never see events purely. We see them through our past hurts, our expectations, our fears. In the workplace, one word from a manager can feel like a verdict. In community, one oversight can feel like rejection. These are the second arrows at work. They distort reality until we can no longer see one another clearly. Imagine two colleagues. One sends an email that feels abrupt. The first arrow is the sting of tone, but then the second arrow is fired. They are angry. They don't like me. They want me gone. Soon the relationship strains. Yet if the person had paused and asked, "What did you mean by this line?" the misunderstanding could have vanished. The second arrow was never necessary. Workplace, community, and the arrows of misunderstanding remind us that trust in groups is fragile. A single arrow of carelessness can unravel months of effort if second arrows are allowed to multiply. But with awareness, even sharp arrows can become teachers. A harsh comment can be met with curiosity instead of resentment. An oversight can be seen as human error instead of deliberate slight. There is a simple practice you can try. When you feel hurt at work or in your community, pause and name the first arrow. I feel disappointed. I feel unseen. Then ask, what story am I adding? Most often, you will find that the story is the true source of suffering. By naming it, you can choose to lay it down. The Buddha once told the story of a man who mistook a rope for a snake in the dark. His fear was real, though the snake was not. Misunderstanding in the workplace and community works the same way. We see a rope of words or actions and believe it to be a snake of rejection, betrayal, or disrespect. The second arrow is our fear, not the reality. Picture a community project. Everyone is working together, but one person feels ignored. The first arrow is the ache of exclusion, but the second arrow says, "They don't value me. I will never belong. I am always on the outside." Soon they withdraw, stop participating, and the community loses their gift. Yet all it may have taken was a simple conversation, a clarifying question. The second arrow was avoidable: workplace, community, and the arrows of misunderstanding also teach us about power. In hierarchies, arrows fly easily downward. A manager's careless tone, a leader's oversight, these can wound deeply. But the second arrows are what crush people. The belief that they are worthless, voiceless, doomed. Awareness helps us break this cycle. We can feel the sting of the first arrow without letting it define our worth. Consider the workplace as a training ground for compassion. Every misunderstanding is a chance to pause, to see the first arrow clearly, to refuse the second. Every colleague's sharpness is an opportunity to practice patience. Every community conflict is a test of whether we can meet pain with clarity instead of blame. The more we practice, the more we transform the places we spend our days. There is a meditation for this as well. Bring to mind a recent misunderstanding at work or in your community. See the first arrow, clearly the actual words or actions. Then see the second arrow, the stories you added. Breathe deeply and imagine laying that second arrow down. Whisper inwardly, "May I see clearly. May I not add unnecessary suffering. May I meet misunderstanding with compassion." Workplace, community, and the arrows of misunderstanding remind us that no group is free from conflict. Arrows will always come, but suffering need not multiply. With awareness, we can choose not to fire second arrows at ourselves or others. We can build workplaces where trust is stronger than gossip, communities where compassion is stronger than division. So remember, the first arrow of misunderstanding is painful but temporary. The second arrow is optional, and it is the one that truly divides. If we refuse it, workplaces can become more than jobs. They can become places of growth. Communities can become more than circles of convenience. They can become refuges of belonging. This is the wisdom of workplace, community, and the arrows of misunderstanding. By seeing clearly, by pausing before the second arrow, we not only protect our own peace, we also protect the fragile web of trust that holds us together. Relationships are where our deepest joys and deepest wounds are born. Families, friendships, partners, workplaces, and communities are the fabric of our human experience. And throughout this journey, we have seen how easily the arrows fly. Words sting, actions cut, silence isolates. These are the first arrows, unavoidable in the dance of human connection. But what destroys relationships is not only the first arrows, it is the second arrows we fire again and again. This is the heart of healing relationships through awareness and compassion. Imagine carrying a bag filled with arrows. Every time someone hurts you, you add another arrow to the bag. Every misunderstanding, every criticism, every disappointment, another arrow. The bag grows heavy, and soon you cannot move freely. You drag it into every conversation, every meeting, every embrace. The person standing before you is no longer just themselves. They are covered in the shadows of every arrow you carry. This is what happens when we hold on to the second arrows. They do not only hurt us, they poison every bond we touch. Healing begins with awareness. Awareness allows us to see the first arrow for what it is, a single event, sharp but passing. And awareness shows us the second arrow for what it is, a story, a projection, a wound we keep deepening. When we pause, breathe, and separate the two, we open a door. We create space between pain and reaction, between wound and weapon. In that space, compassion can enter. Healing relationships through awareness and compassion is not about pretending the first arrow never happened. It is not about denial. It is about meeting pain honestly while refusing to multiply it. When a family member speaks harshly, awareness says, "That hurt me." Compassion adds, "But perhaps they are suffering too." Instead of firing second arrows of resentment, we lay them down. When a friend disappoints us, awareness says, "I feel let down." Compassion adds, "They too are human, imperfect, sometimes overwhelmed." And instead of building walls, we keep the heart open. The Buddha's path of compassion, karuna, reminds us that everyone we meet is carrying their own arrows. The colleague who snaps at you may be wounded by fear at home. The partner who withdraws may be carrying old grief. The neighbor who seems cold may be struggling with loneliness. When we see this, our arrows soften. Instead of reacting with blame, we respond with understanding. Instead of hardening, we open. Forgiveness plays a central role in healing relationships through awareness and compassion. Forgiveness does not mean we excuse harmful actions. It does not mean we allow abuse to continue. It means we refuse to carry the poison of the second arrow any longer. It means we put down the bag of arrows and walk lighter. Forgiveness frees us first, and in that freedom, others may find the space to change too. There is a practice you can try now. Bring to mind someone with whom your relationship feels heavy. See the first arrow, clearly the hurt they caused. Acknowledge it fully. Then, notice the second arrows you've been adding. The repeated stories, the rehearsed arguments, the labels you've given them. Take a breath. As you exhale, imagine setting those second arrows down. Whisper to yourself, "I do not need to carry these anymore." Then, silently, send them a simple wish. May you be free from suffering. May you find peace. You may not feel ready to forgive fully, but even this intention plants a seed of healing. Healing relationships through awareness and compassion also means turning compassion inward. Often, the person we wound most is ourselves. We replay mistakes, call ourselves unworthy, blame ourselves for every arrow that has landed. But when we practice awareness, we see that these too are second arrows. The first arrow may be a real mistake, but the endless self-criticism is optional. Compassion toward ourselves is not indulgence, it is medicine. It is the only way we can show up whole in our relationships. Consider this. When you stop firing second arrows at yourself, you naturally stop firing them at others. The harsh words you no longer use inside become the harsh words you no longer use outside. The forgiveness you extend to your own heart becomes the forgiveness you extend to those around you. Healing relationships begins with healing the way we relate to ourselves. Think of a circle of people holding hands. If even one person releases their grip of anger, the circle loosens and there is room to breathe. If more people put down their second arrows, the circle becomes not a chain of pain, but a web of support. Healing spreads outward, one heart at a time. This is why awareness and compassion are not small acts. They are the seeds of a different kind of world. So how do we live this every day? First, by pausing. The moment you feel hurt, pause before reacting. Name the first arrow clearly. Second, by questioning. Ask yourself, what second arrow am I about to fire? What story am I adding? Third, by choosing compassion. Instead of sharpening the arrow, soften your heart. Instead of multiplying pain, plant a seed of understanding. Over time, these small practices transform relationships. Conflicts soften, trust rebuilds, love deepens. Healing relationships through awareness and compassion is not a quick fix. It is a lifelong practice. Some wounds are deep and take time to heal. Some relationships may never be restored. But even then, you can lay down the second arrows and free yourself from carrying them further. And every time you choose compassion, even in small ways, you shift the direction of your life. The Buddha once said, "Hatred never ends through hatred. Hatred ends only through love." This is not abstract poetry, it is practical guidance for healing. As long as we keep firing second arrows, hatred grows. When we put them down, love has space to enter. And in love, relationships can begin to heal. As we close Chapter 4, remember this: every relationship carries arrows. Pain is inevitable. Misunderstanding is certain, but suffering is optional. Healing is possible. Through awareness, we see the first arrow clearly. Through compassion, we refuse the second. And in that choice, relationships, whether with family, friends, partners, or community, can become not prisons of pain, but fields of growth, forgiveness, and love. So as you reflect tonight, ask yourself, whose arrows am I still carrying? What second arrows can I lay down? And what act of compassion, even small, can I choose in my next conversation? The answers to these questions are the beginning of healing. This is the promise of healing relationships through awareness and compassion. Not a world without arrows, but a life where arrows no longer multiply. Not perfection, but the quiet strength to keep the heart open again and again. Life will always bring arrows. That is something none of us can escape. Pain, loss, sickness, change. These are woven into the very fabric of being alive. But what makes the greatest difference is not whether arrows arrive, but how we meet them. And here, the teaching becomes very simple, very human. Mindfulness is our daily refuge. This is the path beyond arrows. Mindfulness as daily refuge. Mindfulness is not about sitting on a mountaintop for hours, nor is it about escaping from life. Mindfulness is the art of returning to this very moment, exactly as it is, without adding the second arrow. When we are mindful, we meet the first arrow of pain directly, but we do not multiply it with endless stories, judgments, or regrets. We simply allow it to be what it is, a moment of experience, nothing more, nothing less. This is why mindfulness is called a refuge. It does not remove the storms of life, but it gives us shelter in the middle of them. Imagine you are drinking a cup of tea. In an ordinary, distracted state, your mind is not really tasting the tea. It is racing ahead to your next task, or replaying a conversation from yesterday. Then, if someone says something unpleasant, your mind grabs that moment and spins it into stories, adding second arrows of irritation. But if you pause, hold the cup gently, notice the warmth in your hand, inhale the fragrance of the tea, and take one mindful sip, something changes. In that moment of presence, no second arrow can land. There is only the warmth of the cup, the taste on your tongue, the breath moving in and out. That is mindfulness as daily refuge. Think about walking down the street. Normally, our thoughts wander, worries, plans, regrets. If someone looks at us strangely, the second arrow flies instantly. They must be judging me. I must look foolish. But with mindfulness, the same walk becomes something entirely different. You feel your feet touching the ground, you notice the air against your skin, you hear the rhythm of your breath. The stranger's glance comes and goes, just as a sound comes and goes. No story, no second arrow, just life unfolding, the path beyond arrows. Mindfulness as daily refuge is about discovering that we always have a choice. We cannot stop the first arrow from striking, but we can decide whether to pick up the second arrow. Mindfulness is that decision, lived moment by moment. Each time we return to presence, each time we breathe instead of reacting, each time we see clearly rather than spiraling into stories, we are choosing refuge, we are choosing freedom. Let us pause and picture something simple. You are washing dishes. Usually it feels like a chore, something to get through. Then your mind starts complaining. Why am I always the one doing this? No one appreciates me. This is unfair. The second arrows pile up, but mindfulness changes everything. Instead of resisting, you feel the water on your hands. You notice the weight of the dish. You listen to the sound of the bubbles. Suddenly, the moment is just what it is. No resentment, no second arrows, just presence. Even washing dishes becomes a refuge. The Buddha once described mindfulness as the path to the deathless. Why? Because when you are mindful, you step outside the endless cycle of reaction. You are no longer trapped by past regrets or future fears. You are here, alive, in this breath, and in this space, the second arrow cannot find you. You are free, even if only for a moment. That freedom is the taste of the deathless. But mindfulness is not only for calm moments, it is especially for moments of pain. Imagine receiving bad news. The first arrow pierces your chest, tightens, your stomach knots. Without mindfulness, the second arrows come immediately. This should not have happened. I cannot bear this. My life is ruined. But with mindfulness, you take a breath. You say quietly to yourself, this is pain. This is real. You feel the tightness, the ache, but you do not add the story. You do not multiply the wound. This is mindfulness as refuge, not an escape from pain, but a way of holding it without drowning. The path beyond arrows. Mindfulness as daily refuge is also about small pauses. Just one breath can be enough. You do not need a meditation cushion. You do not need a quiet temple. You only need the willingness to stop for a moment and see. While waiting at a red light, instead of cursing traffic, feel your hands on the wheel. While standing in line, instead of resenting the delay, notice the sensation of your feet on the floor. While listening to someone, instead of rehearsing your reply, open your awareness fully to their words, their tone, their presence. Each small pause is a doorway to refuge. Mindfulness is also a practice of kindness. When you notice your mind wandering, do not scold yourself. That would only be another second arrow. Instead, smile softly and return to the breath, return to the moment. This gentle returning is itself the heart of the practice. Every time you return, you lay down another arrow. Every time you forgive yourself for wandering, you build compassion. In this way, mindfulness and compassion walk hand in hand. Think of a storm outside your window. The wind howls, the rain lashes, the thunder shakes the sky. That is the first arrow, the storm of life. If you run into the storm without shelter, you are soaked and battered. But if you stand at the window, aware and safe. You still hear the thunder, you still see the rain, but you are not destroyed by it. That window of awareness is mindfulness. It is not denying the storm, but finding refuge within it. This is the essence of the path beyond arrows. Mindfulness as daily refuge. You might wonder, can something so simple really make such a difference? The answer is yes. Science now confirms what the Buddha taught long ago. Studies show that mindfulness reduces stress, calms anxiety, strengthens the immune system, and increases emotional resilience. But beyond science, the lived experience speaks louder. Try it yourself. The next time you feel anger, rise, pause, breathe. Notice the sensation without adding the story. You will see the fire softens. The arrow remains only one. As you weave mindfulness into your day, remember this. Mindfulness is not about perfection. You will forget. You will fire second arrows. You will lose yourself in stories. That is natural. The practice is simply to notice when it happens and gently return. No shame, no blame, just return. Over and over again. Each return is a victory. Each return is freedom. Let's practice for a moment, right now. Sit comfortably. Take a slow breath in. Feel the air filling your lungs. Breathe out gently. Notice your shoulders relax. Bring to mind something small that has bothered you today. A sharp word, a mistake, a worry. See the first arrow clearly, the ache, the sting. Now notice the second arrow, the thoughts about it, the story around it. Take another breath, and as you breathe out, imagine setting the second arrow down. Let it fall. What remains is simply the first arrow sharp. Yes, but only one, and even that one is already passing. Notice the space this creates. Notice the quiet. This is mindfulness as refuge. In time, you will find that mindfulness does not only protect you from second arrows, it transforms the way you live. Meals become moments of gratitude. Conversations become spaces of connection. Work becomes a field of practice. Even suffering becomes a teacher. Mindfulness turns life itself into a refuge, so carry this with you. Every arrow will remind you. The pain will come, that is the first arrow. But before the second arrow lands, pause, take one breath, return to presence. That breath is your refuge. That moment is your freedom. This is the path beyond arrows. Mindfulness as daily refuge. Forgiveness is one of the most misunderstood words in the human vocabulary. Many people think forgiveness means excusing the harm, or pretending it never happened, or letting someone hurt us again. But forgiveness is none of those things. Forgiveness is freedom. Forgiveness is choosing to stop stabbing ourselves with the second arrow again and again, long after the first arrow has already struck. This is forgiveness and freedom. Setting down the arrows of the past. Think about something painful from your past. A betrayal by a friend, a harsh word from a parent, a partner who left without explanation. Those were first arrows. They hurt deeply. They pierced your heart. But what happened afterward? Perhaps for years you have carried those moments like heavy stones. Each time you replay them in your mind, each time you tighten with anger or collapse with sadness, you fire the second arrow again, and sometimes you fire it hundreds of times. The wound itself happened once, but the suffering continues because of the story, because of the weight you refuse to put down. Forgiveness is the decision to lay down that weight. The Buddha once described resentment as holding a burning coal in your hand, waiting for the chance to throw it at someone else. But the only one who gets burned is you. That is the second arrow. Forgiveness is simply opening your hand and letting the coal fall. It does not deny that the fire burned you once. It just stops you from burning yourself again. Imagine a childhood memory that still hurts. Maybe you felt ignored, unloved, unseen. The first arrow was the pain of that moment. But every time you whisper to yourself, "I was never good enough. No one cared about me," you are stabbing yourself with a second arrow. Forgiveness, in this case, is not even about the other person. It is about you. It is about saying to your younger self, "You deserved love. You are enough. I will not keep stabbing you with these arrows anymore." That is the freedom of forgiveness. Now think about relationships that ended badly. A friend who disappeared, a partner who betrayed your trust. The first arrow was heartbreak, but the second arrow is the ongoing story. I will never trust again. I will never heal. I will always be broken. Those are arrows you fire at yourself. Forgiveness is not saying, "What they did was right." Forgiveness is saying, "I will not let what they did keep me imprisoned. I will not carry their arrow inside me forever. I choose freedom." Forgiveness also applies to the mistakes you have made yourself. How many nights have you replayed a decision you regret? How many times have you whispered to yourself, "If only I had chosen differently. If only I had been better"? The first arrow was the mistake itself, but the second arrow is the endless cycle of blame. Forgiveness here means turning to yourself and saying, "Yes, I stumbled. Yes, I failed. But I will not stab myself forever. I will learn. I will grow. I will begin again." This is why forgiveness and freedom are inseparable. The past cannot be changed. The arrows that struck cannot be erased. But you can stop carrying them. You can set them down. And when you do, your hands are free again. Free to hold love. Free to hold joy. Free to hold peace. Let us try a reflection. Bring to mind one wound from your past. Feel the first arrow, the sharpness of the memory. Now notice the second arrow, the story you keep repeating, the anger you keep carrying. Take a slow breath in, and as you breathe out, imagine placing that second arrow on the ground. Whisper quietly to yourself, "I do not need to carry this anymore. I choose freedom." Feel the weight lift, even just a little. That is forgiveness in action. Forgiveness is also the bridge to compassion. When you forgive, you see more clearly that others too are struck by arrows. A parent who hurt you may have been carrying their own wounds. A friend who betrayed you may have been pierced by fear or insecurity. This does not excuse the harm, but it explains it. And with understanding comes softness. With softness comes compassion. Forgiveness opens that door, the path beyond arrows. Mindfulness as daily refuge shows us how to meet each moment. Compassion for self and others. Healing through connection shows us how to soften our hearts. And now, forgiveness and freedom. Setting down the arrows of the past shows us how to release the weight we no longer need to carry. These are not separate practices. They are one path. They are one continuous unfolding of freedom. The truth is, carrying resentment never punishes the other person. It only punishes you. Carrying guilt never heals the past. It only keeps you stuck. Forgiveness is not something you do for others. It is something you do for yourself. It is the act of refusing to keep living in the shadow of old arrows. Picture a prisoner holding the key to their own cell, but refusing to use it. That is what happens when you hold on to resentment, shame, or guilt. Forgiveness is turning the key. Forgiveness is walking out into the sunlight. Forgiveness is saying, "The arrows struck once. I will not let them strike forever." Let this be your practice today. Think of one arrow from your past that you still carry. See it clearly. Feel its weight. And then whisper softly, "I forgive. I release. I choose freedom." Do not worry if the feeling is not perfect, if the wound is not completely gone. Forgiveness is not a single act. It is a practice, a returning, a softening over time. Each time you choose forgiveness, you loosen the grip of the past. Each time you choose forgiveness, you set down another arrow. So remember this: forgiveness and freedom. Setting down the arrows of the past is not about forgetting. It is about remembering differently, remembering without stabbing yourself again, remembering without carrying the arrow into tomorrow. Forgiveness is freedom. Forgiveness is healing. Forgiveness is the path beyond arrows. Living lightly is not about running away from life. It is about walking through life without being crushed by its weight. Many of us live as though everything depends on us, as though we must carry the world on our shoulders. We hold tightly to our plans, to our possessions, to our image in the eyes of others. We grip so hard that our hands cramp, our hearts strain, and our spirits grow weary. The Buddha's teaching of the two arrows showed us how much of our suffering is self-created. Now, in this reflection, we step into another dimension of freedom, living lightly. This is simplicity, presence, and the release of control. Think of how exhausting it is to live with clenched fists. We clutch at outcomes, we grasp at recognition, we cling to control. Each grasp is a second arrow. The first arrow may be uncertainty itself, life unfolding in ways we did not predict. But the second arrow is the mind's desperate attempt to demand that everything go our way. This should not be happening. I cannot rest until I fix it. I must make the world bend to my will. That demand is endless, and it is heavy. Living lightly means loosening that grip. It means opening the hand, releasing the rope, and discovering that the sky does not collapse when we let go. Simplicity is the first doorway. Look around at your life. How much of what you carry actually nourishes you? How many commitments, possessions, and distractions do you haul simply because you are afraid to set them down? Simplicity does not mean deprivation. It does not mean giving up joy or beauty. It means recognizing that less can be more, that a few meaningful acts can bring deeper peace than 1,000 hollow gestures. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 useless words is a single word that brings peace." The same is true for how we live. Better than 1,000 frantic tasks is one act carried out with full presence. Better than 100 shallow connections is one friendship rooted in compassion. Simplicity is not about having nothing, it is about having what matters. Presence is the second doorway. Living lightly means living here, not constantly rushing into tomorrow or replaying yesterday. How often do you eat a meal while your mind is already on the next meeting? How often do you talk with someone while rehearsing your reply instead of listening? This restlessness is another form of the second arrow. The first arrow may be the natural busyness of life, but the second is the mind's inability to settle, to stop running. Presence dissolves that arrow. When you breathe and return to this moment, life feels lighter. Even the same responsibilities, the same challenges, feel less suffocating when you meet them with presence instead of panic. The release of control is the third doorway. This is perhaps the most difficult, because we are taught from childhood to be in charge, to manage every detail, to achieve, to win. Control feels like safety, but the truth is, much of life is beyond our control. Seasons shift, bodies age, loved ones change, plans collapse. Holding on as if we could prevent impermanence is like trying to stop the tide with our hands. The first arrow is the simple fact of change. The second arrow is the refusal to accept it, the insistence that life must remain still for our comfort. Release is the medicine. Release means saying, I will do my best, but I will not demand that life obey me. I will walk with change, not against it. This release is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is the recognition that peace comes not from controlling everything, but from aligning with the flow of what is. Let us pause for a practice. Sit quietly for a moment. Take a slow breath in, and as you breathe out, imagine your hands opening. Picture one burden you are carrying right now. It could be the pressure of success, the need to be understood, the fear of the future. See it clearly, and now imagine setting it down. Whisper softly, I release, I let go, I live lightly. Feel the relief in your chest. Notice the space that opens inside you when you are no longer gripping so tightly. That space is freedom. That is the heart of living lightly. When you live lightly, you discover joy hidden in ordinary places. A walk outside becomes rich when you are not rushing. A conversation becomes sacred when you are fully present. A simple act of kindness becomes luminous when you are not weighed down by ego. Simplicity, presence, and release do not make life empty. They make life full. Full of meaning, full of clarity, full of peace. Of course, living lightly does not mean ignoring responsibilities. You still pay your bills. You still care for your loved ones. You still show up to your work. But you do it without adding unnecessary arrows. You do it without carrying stories that crush you. You do it with the steadiness of someone who knows that life is not meant to be controlled, only lived. The Buddha reminded us again and again that clinging is the root of suffering. Clinging is the second arrow that multiplies pain. Living lightly is the practice of unslinging, of loosening the knots, of breathing into the truth that everything changes. When you live this way, you do not lose anything essential. You gain freedom. You gain the ability to walk through storms without being carried away. You gain the ability to love without needing to possess. You gain the ability to work without becoming enslaved to achievement. So remember this: living lightly, simplicity, presence, and the release of control is not a luxury. It is a necessity for peace. In a world that shouts for your attention, that pushes you to buy more, achieve more, prove more, the radical act is to live lightly, to choose less noise, more silence, less grasping, more letting go, less control, more trust. Each time you do, you are refusing to fire a second arrow. You are refusing to weigh yourself down with burdens you were never meant to carry. Let this be your path. Walk through your days with open hands. Choose simplicity over clutter. Choose presence over distraction. Choose release over control. And notice, moment by moment, how much lighter life becomes. Notice how suffering softens when you stop gripping. Notice how peace arises when you live lightly. As we arrive at the final part of this journey, take a deep breath. Feel the weight of the last few hours of reflection. You have walked through the Buddha's teaching of the two arrows. You have explored how pain is unavoidable, but suffering is optional. You have seen how the mind creates the second arrow, and how mindfulness, compassion, forgiveness, and release can free us. Now we come to the closing arc of Chapter 5, Integrating the Path, a life beyond arrows. Integration means taking these teachings out of the words you hear and into the life you live. A teaching is not meant to be stored on a bookshelf or locked away in memory. It is meant to be practiced in the small, ordinary moments of your day, because that is where the arrows come. Not only in great tragedies, but in traffic, in emails, in conversations, in the whispers of your own mind. A life beyond arrows is not built in one dramatic decision. It is built breath by breath, moment by moment. Think of the path you have traveled with me. First, you learn to see the arrows clearly. Pain is the first arrow, suffering is the second. That simple distinction is the seed of awakening. Then, you learn to meet pain with presence. Instead of resisting, you paused, you breathed. You allowed the first arrow to be only what it is. Then, you saw the habit of rumination, how the mind replays pain endlessly, and you discovered that letting go of those loops is how we dissolve the second arrow. You practiced forgiveness, not to excuse, but to free yourself from carrying old wounds. You practiced living lightly, choosing simplicity, presence, and release instead of clinging and control. Each step was not separate. Each step was part of one path, the path beyond arrows. What does it mean to integrate this path into your life? It means making mindfulness a daily refuge, waking up in the morning and taking 3 breaths before reaching for your phone. Eating your meal with attention instead of distraction. Listening to someone you love with openness instead of rehearsing your reply. These small acts are not small, they are the ground of freedom. It means bringing compassion into your encounters. When someone snaps at you, remember the second arrow. Do not pick it up. Pause and see that they, too, are carrying their wounds. Respond with softness instead of fire. That is compassion in action. It means practicing forgiveness as a way of life. Each time an old memory stirs, notice if you are holding the coal. If you are, open your hand, let it fall. Whisper to yourself, I forgive, I release, I choose freedom, and keep walking. It means living lightly, looking at your days and asking, what truly matters? Choosing to let go of the noise, choosing to release what does not nourish, choosing presence over pressure, choosing release over control. These choices create a life that feels spacious, steady, and light. Integration is also remembering that this is a practice, not perfection. You will still be struck by arrows. You will still sometimes fire second ones. That is part of being human. But each time you notice, each time you pause, each time you choose differently, you step more firmly onto the path. The freedom is not in never stumbling. The freedom is in knowing you can always stand back up. Let us close with one final practice. Take a deep breath in, feel your chest rise. Breathe out slowly. Now bring to mind one arrow from your day. Maybe it was a comment that stung. Maybe it was a worry that weighed on you. See the first arrow clearly. Now notice if you added a second. Did you replay it? Did you tell yourself a story? Did you grip it tightly? If so, take another breath. And as you exhale, imagine setting the second arrow down. Let it fall. Whisper quietly, "I will not carry this anymore." Feel the relief. Feel the spaciousness. This is the essence of integration. This is the practice you can carry with you every day. A life beyond arrows does not mean a life without pain. It means a life where pain no longer becomes prison. It means a life where you meet each arrow with clarity, compassion, and courage. It means a life where forgiveness replaces resentment, where simplicity replaces clinging, where presence replaces distraction, and where release replaces control. This is the promise of the Dharma. Not escape, but freedom. Not avoidance, but awakening. So as we close Chapter 5, remember, the Buddha's teaching is not a philosophy to be admired. It is a path to be walked. You do not need to wait for perfect conditions. You do not need to wait for a retreat or a temple. The path is here, in this moment, in this breath, in the way you meet the arrows of your own life. Integrate it, live it, become it. May you carry these words not as more weight, but as wings. May you walk through your days with lighter steps. May you meet pain with courage, suffering with wisdom, and life with love. This is integrating the path, a life beyond arrows. This is the gift of the Dharma, and this is the freedom that has always been waiting within you. Thank you, my dear friends, for walking with me through this long journey. Your presence here, your willingness to sit with these reflections, is a quiet act of courage in itself. In a world that constantly pushes us to rush, to compare, to grasp and to cling, choosing to pause and listen is a rare gift. I am deeply grateful that you shared these hours with me. As we come to the end of this teaching, I want to offer you my heartfelt wish. May your days be lighter. May your nights be peaceful. May your heart be steady when life throws its arrows, and may your wisdom guide you to put down the second arrow again and again. If you are listening to this before sleep, I wish you the gentlest rest. May your body soften, may your mind quiet down, and may your dreams be filled with kindness. If you are listening during the day, may these words continue to echo as a reminder that peace is never far away. It is always here, in this breath, waiting for you. From my own heart, I also want to share this simple lesson I have learned. The Buddha's words are not ancient relics. They are alive. Every time I face disappointment, every time I hear that voice of self-blame rising inside me, I remember the two arrows, and I remind myself, the first arrow is life, the second arrow is my choice. I do not have to keep stabbing myself. That awareness changes everything. It brings freedom not as an idea, but as a living reality. This is not just the Buddha's path, it is the path we all can walk, right here, right now. So, if this message touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need it. And if you haven't already, I warmly invite you to subscribe to this channel, Buddhism Verity, so we can continue walking this path together. Every week, we will keep exploring these timeless teachings, making them real in our modern lives, and helping each other live with more clarity, compassion, and peace. Thank you again, from the bottom of my heart. May you be safe, may you be well, may you be free. And for those of you listening at night, I wish you the sweetest dreams. Good night, my friends.